Good evening and welcome to all in attendance here tonight and those viewing this evening's meeting. This is a regular meeting of the Oak Harbor Chamber of Commerce. Oh, no, I did it again. 40 years on the Chamber of Commerce. We are actually at City Council here tonight, and it is 6 p.m.
It's your sixth meeting of the day.
Yeah, that's all right. This is the City Council meeting of the City of Oak Harbor, and it is still 6 p.m. Welcome. Tonight we will start our meeting. Actually, this is a call to order followed. Tonight we will not have our normal invocation. Pastor Lawler could not be with us, but I invite you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Seeing that we have a full council tonight, we'll move to item number 1, approval of the agenda. Does anybody wish to make any changes on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will then move to item number 2. And tonight we have an honor and recognition, and I think our Police Chief Dresker is somewhere in the building, maybe, perhaps. Looks like a good part of the department is here. Here comes Chief Dresker. That's all right.
Had to round up the troops.
Take him off of a traffic call, did you?
Yeah. No, he's just coming on work. Okay, Mayor and council members, thank you for letting me come today and give a presentation to one of our officers. So I have the honor of giving a letter of recognition presentation to Officer Ron Esparza. And Ron, actually, can I get you stand over there for me? You know, I kind of had to drag Ron over. He just likes to do his job without a lot of kudos, but he does a great job. And you know, we see almost every day in police work the dangers that are presented and some of the things that make the media, but this is the type of stuff that is more of a daily activity for a police officer, and it definitely is for Officer Ron Esparza. So I've got a letter of recognition here that I want to just read and go through it. So this is a letter of recognition for Officer Ron Esparza. On or about August 28th of 2017, the Oak Harbor Police Department received a following email and contact from an Oak Harbor citizen, and I'm going to read in quotes. I want to say thank you to the Oak Harbor Police for being true peace officers. This weekend, a friend of mine had a birthday party for her 6-year-old daughter. There was a conflict with a neighbor that was preventing the child from being able to have her birthday piñata in a common community area. When the police were asked to come help, an officer arrived and stood by while the child had her piñata. The officer spoke kindly to the neighbor who had the conflict, effectively calming her and peacefully ensuring that things went smoothly for the child's celebration. I didn't catch the officer's name, but he was the epitome of what big heroes our police officers are. Thank you. So that's a quote from the female. So this is back to me. As a police officer and the police chief, I take tremendous pride in seeing a citizen take the time to acknowledge the actions of our officers performing in an exemplary manner such as this. Officer Ron Esparza was the officer the citizen was referring to. And I sent out an email because we didn't know who the officer was. And of course, Ron didn't respond. But luckily, somebody made me aware that he was the one that was out there. Ron's actions bring credit to himself, law enforcement, and the Oak Harbor Police Department. This type of interaction is important for citizens to have with law enforcement, especially during the current climate our country is in as it relates to law enforcement. Ron's actions represent the dedication which peace officers around this country have to our communities and our commitment to helping others and doing the best we can at all times. Ron's performance on the job can best be described as very caring and is consistent with other activities I've seen Ron perform, including a recent incident where he took care of an infant at the police station for a significant period of time and acted like a daddy. And we're putting some photographs on our walls at the police station, and we've got 6 initial ones up. We're going to continue putting more and start rotating them. I took this one on a day when we unfortunately had to, one of our unfortunate things where we have to deal with issues in CPS, and we had a child that had to be placed. And I think Ron, for probably 2 hours, was doing that. And that's one of my favorite photos that we have up on the wall right now, and I picked that as one to put up there. So that's Daddy Ron. So this letter of recognition recognizes the outstanding care for community and dedication to duty displayed by Officer Ron Esparza in his response to this situation. And I'd like to personally thank Ron and give him this letter of recognition and thank him for his efforts. Ron chooses not to say anything. So, anyways, that's recognition. Ron performs a great job for us. You know, he's a reflection of the vast majority of what our officers do, and I very much appreciate it.
So, Chief, we're going to adjourn for 5 minutes until 6:10. I'd like to personally thank Ron, and I think the council would like to come over and thank Ron. So, we'll be adjourned here until 6:10. Okay, I guess we're a little early, but it looks like we're all back. Let's reconvene here. We are now moving to item number 3, the citizen comment period. Citizens may comment on subjects of interest not listed on the agenda or items listed on the consent agenda at this time. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly into the microphone. Please limit comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. Comments regarding candidates or ballot measures are not allowed under state law. Individuals participating in public comment are asked to refrain from speaking on these topics during the comment period. So, citizen comment period is now open. And it looks like we have Hal Hovey on the list, and even if you're not on the list, this would be a time that you're invited to speak. Hal?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Hal Hovey. I'm a resident of Oak Harbor, and I'm also a member of the Oak Harbor City Planning Commission. Whidbey Island needs homes. This is not a Navy problem. This is not an Oak Harbor problem. This is an Island County problem. We have jobs here in Island County, and we don't have homes for all the people who work in those jobs. The lack of adequate housing in Island County is forcing approximately 2,500 people a day to leave the county to commute home. The facts are pretty simple. If we can't produce homes for these workers, they're going to live off island, they're going to get on our roads and ferries and drive across the bridge, and they're going to take their money off island. There's millions of dollars every year that goes to property tax in Skagit and Snohomish County that belongs to Island County employers. We are subsidizing Skagit and Snohomish County. This is an Island County problem. This is money that's coming out of the coffers of Island County, Oak Harbor, and the other municipalities in the county. I've read some articles in the paper in which some folks are quoted as saying things that make it sound like this is a problem that Oak Harbor needs to solve. Those people are wrong. We're all in this together. This is a county problem. We need to work together to solve the problem. It's causing hardships all over the island, not just in Oak Harbor. And it's draining revenue that rightfully belongs here in Island County. I've also read comments that indicate that the process to solve this housing problem could take 5 or 6 years. And I understand the need for processes, but if a process takes 5 years, then there's probably something wrong with the process. The process should be a tool for solving our problems. The process should not be an obstacle creating a problem. Right now, it sounds like the processes are being used as an excuse to not solve the problem. Bottom line is, if we kick this can down the road, all we're doing is kicking it off the cliff. It's never going to get easier to solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal. Okay, other citizen comments?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm Lanny Nienhaus, live at 699 Southeast Regatta Drive here in Oak Harbor. I have a very short and to the point message. We need homes. We have hundreds of employees living off island today, not only with NAS Woodby, TSI, Oak Harbor School Districts, and one of our second largest employer on Island County, Nichols Brothers Boat Builders. They also need homes. And a lot of their employees are leaving off the island to live off the island, and they're working on our island. Today in the Northwest MLS, this morning, I checked to see what the availability of active homes in the Oak Harbor area from $200,000 to $300,000 homes. There are 42 on the market. South of Oak Harbor to Langley, there are 29 homes in the $200,000 to $300,000 home prices. We need homes. Economically, with our new sewer plant online, the skyrocketing prices of our utility costs for every one of us in this city, our roads, everything that's needed of repair, and our economic loss of tax dollars, we need homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nienhaus.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Phillips, 1192 Channel Lane, Oak Harbor. And I am here also tonight to tell you all that we definitely need homes. I've been working in the real estate industry here for 36 years, and I truly, in all that time, have never seen such a shortage of homes. And Lanny was kind enough to do his report today. I had school today out of town, so I did mine yesterday. But I'd like to pass these out to you and let you see what is available in Oak Harbor, Cooteville, and South. Please take those with you and look. And those are the homes that are presently on the market. I also have, just from my own office, a picture of our rental board with no rentals. I heard years ago a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I'm hoping that'll work for you to see. That is indicative of many of the offices in town. If we get one house in the rental market on the board, they're gone, usually within 24 hours. And also, I'm asking you tonight to please continue to recommend to the Island County Planning Commission to put the Wright's Crossing project on their docket. They're talking about delaying it until next year or the year after. I was at the meeting last week, and this is an urgent call for us. You have to think about all the folks on Whidbey Island who are looking for homes, and they go from Nichols Brothers north, including the hospitals, teachers, our Department of Defense, and certainly our military. And what I am hearing now is that military are driving, some of them at least 2 hours each direction to work each day. And we need to move this forward. So I ask you to be proactive with this and to please recommend to the Island County Planning Commission to put this on their docket for this year. Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Olmberg.
Mayor, we have an agenda item regarding Wright's Crossing. Is this the appropriate time to be discussing?
Actually, no, we would be discussing, we will have time to take public comment later on our agenda for Wright's Crossing, so, thank you. Okay, any other public comment at this time? Citizen comment period? Going once? Twice? Okay. We will end item number 3, citizen comment period, at this time, and move to our consent agenda, item number 4 on the agenda. Does anybody have any need for discussion on those items? If not, oh, yes, Councilor Heisen.
Not a discussion, just a quick question. Is Kevin here that we might
Kevin Ostenson.
meet him? I'm just not sure if
I
he's
don't
here. Oh,
think-
he is.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Kevin? Okay, there's Kevin Ostenson. Welcome.
Just wanted to get a visual. Hi.
Appointment, congratulations being appointed to the Planning Commission, position number 5. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, and with that, our consent agenda is, we'll move forward, and that stands approved as presented. Under Mayor's comments, I have a couple of items and would like to remind you that this is Constitution Week from September 17th through the 23rd. It is the 230th anniversary of the drafting of our Constitution. Also, September 22nd is Falls Prevention Awareness Day. Our own Oak Harbor Senior Center will be hosting a Falls Prevention Fair this coming Thursday, September 21st, from 9 a.m. until noon. I think that I heard them say that 70% of our people that are in our hospitals are there usually related to a fall. So the prevention of falls and anything that we can do to prevent those from happening or for the better, certainly. And then our artwork behind us here, we have a change. This artist was born and raised in Pocatello, Idaho. Her name is Rainey Lindell. She said it's a great place to grow up. Rainey now lives in Coupeville, Washington on Whidbey Island. Rainey's 7th grade art teacher stirred her creative abilities, and she took every art course she could. Being a self-taught artist and loving the landscape, she found subjects every day in this area of water and mountains. Rainey enjoys painting with oils. She finds that they give her the rich, warm, dark colors that make a painting glow, as well as vibrant, bright colors that add the zing. The flowers in a breeze, the warmth of the sunset, or the yellow trees in autumn all move Rainey to capture the moment in time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but she learns from every painting. Life is good. Thank you, Rainey, for coming to display your artwork. And so with that, I'll move on to council. Any council? Yes, Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to wish NAS happy 75th anniversary on the 21st of September.
All right.
It's quite an achievement, yes.
We have a special guest in our audience here.
I believe so.
Commanding Officer Jeff Moore, Captain Moore, and his son, Nate. This is Nate. Welcome, Nate. Welcome, Captain. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you. While we were listening earlier about the need for housing, people were talking about commuting back and forth and all that stuff. The thought came to my brain that we not only need more housing, but we are extremely lucky. We don't have the number of automobile accidents that and I'm going to say this is going to sound weird, that we should have with all these people commuting off island, commuting the length of the island. So we're very lucky for that. And thank the drivers out there for being good drivers. Thank you.
Okay, other council comments? Okay, seeing none, we will, oops, oh, Councilor Heisem, sorry.
Sorry, I was a little slow on the uptake there. I'm going to put Chief Merrill on the spot with your mention of the fall prevention. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard a phrase, and it was something like, nobody over the age of 60 should be on a ladder. Is that the right age? I'm looking at you. Oh, okay. Well, for whatever reason, it is public enemy number one when it comes to injuries. So regardless of who you are, how old you are, make sure you've got a buddy, you've got a spotter there. Always a good idea. And to Officer Esparza, and I didn't want to put him on the spot when he was here because he clearly was very comfortable with all the public recognition. But Chief's repeated mention of the term peace officer struck me because it's not something that we hear a lot of. You know, we hear police officer, but how often do you really hear peace officer? And so it's one thing to keep the serve and protect thing in mind, and it's another when an officer's actions are the thing that remind you that they are a peace officer. And that just struck me as very profound. So very proud of OHPD always, yeah. And on that note, across the street at OHPD, there is a 24-hour, 365-day-a-week prescription drug disposal drop-off site. I believe it's the only facility on the island that's 24 hours. There are other places where you can go and dispose of, you know, unused meds, expired meds, stuff that you tried that didn't work, stuff that's building up. You can do that once a year on Drug Take Back Day, which I think is at the end of April. But here in Oak Harbor, we have the advantage of being able to do that anytime we want to. So you take them out of the bottle, you put it in a Ziploc bag, you drop it off, it gets properly disposed of, no questions asked, and it's not in your home for anybody else to get a hold of. So really important to keep in mind. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor Heisen. Anyone else? Okay. Now we will move on to our city administrator.
Thank you,
Dr.
Mayor.
Merriman.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. A couple of dates to mark down on your calendar. One is coming up soon. Tomorrow from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, we have our joint special workshop meeting. This is on parks, recreation, and open space plan. And again, that'll be here at City Hall from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And then the following week, on the 27th, we have our regular City Council workshop at 2 o'clock as well. A little bit of work that staff has been doing this week. Just to let you know, we did apply for a $300,000 grant. It's a water quality stormwater grant with Department of Ecology. And we're going to hopefully get this and use that money to help pay for some of the costs of the interpretive center in the wastewater treatment plant. So we'll be looking forward to hearing the results of that application soon. Some of the human resources activity we have right now, I wanted to bring you up to speed on. We have a few positions we're working on. We have street specialists, 1 and 2 positions. We have wastewater treatment plant operator applications coming in. I hear right now we have 44 applications coming in, so that's a good response so far, and we'll be moving through that process. And over in the police department, we have a lateral recruitment effort going on and also some testing for the sergeant positions. So those are kind of active positions that are in some form of process. We will have 3 people to bring to you for introduction at some point in the near future. You've met Liz Lang before at the Senior Center. She's actually being promoted to be the next Senior Center manager over there. She's replacing Mary, who left just a month or so ago. We also have a building official coming to work for us. His name is Scott King. He's replacing Brian Lee downstairs, and his first day here with us will be on October 18th. And then finally, we have a gentleman coming to work for us named Michael Gilbert, and he's in the storm drain wastewater collections area, and he'll be starting September 21st this week. So a lot of activity going on and a lot of things moving. So the next item I have, I'm actually going to hand this off to Brett to give you an update on the clean water facility.
Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say. It's time for our Clean Water Facility project update. We hit a major milestone last week. We actually put a roof on. So this is actually topped out. We probably should have put a flag up. That's sort of a tradition, but we're kind of a little low on the ground. But anyway, that is that. We've actually decked it over this morning, so that's coming together. We'll be topping out these buildings as we build them. This one will actually leave. We're going to leave a hole in it though, because we still got to get stuff in and out. So it will be partially topped off. This is a big part of our project as we move forward. This project is largely a mechanical system, and so we're starting to install these big pipes. These are actually influent pipes into our gallery. They're 24-inch, and see all those bolts on those flanges. Each one of those bolts takes about a minute with their roto hammer, so it tells you how much work goes into that. This is just one corner of the building. The whole gallery is just like this right now. It's a regular anthill. A lot of things going on down there. That gives you some idea of the scale, size of what we're dealing with. Recent activities on the design. We're continuing to work with the Windjammer 90% design documents. That should be coming to us in mid-October. We're also continuing working on our SCADA software development. We actually have a meeting with our plant operators tomorrow afternoon to go over some of the screens and start teaching them how to use it. We're actually going to have a workstation down at the bank building with a simulator, so they actually can play with the machine for real. Won't be running anything, but they will be able to start getting some hands-on experience with it. Construction-wise, we're placing concrete. The concrete is starting to go into its last 15–20%, but we are remaining ahead of schedule and below our labor estimates. We're hanging in there. We're continuing backfilling around the structures. We are a lot of GMP number 9, which is the process, mechanical and electrical, which I showed you. That's becoming the big thrust of a lot of things we're doing. Number 11 is a lot of the architectural non-process buildings. So we're starting to see a lot of submittals for doors and bricks and that type of thing. Right now, as of this week, we have 100 workers on site. We'll probably stay at that level for another 6 weeks to a month, and we'll probably start to phase down a little bit. We are starting this administration building. Is a wood frame building. All the rest of the buildings are CMU, but we are starting the self-perform wood framing. It's been kind of ongoing, but it's starting to pick up, and we're starting to see big glue lamps showing up here pretty soon. We're still, like I say, the CMU guys are going to town. They're laying bricks like crazy. Funding-wise, there's nothing new on the legislature on the capital replacement list. Nothing happened there. And as Doug said earlier, we are chasing opportunities. We have some major decision points and updates coming up. Later this evening, we will be discussing a reuse water plan for the effluent. Also, we will be bringing in a contract amendment with CRCI. I'm still working with them on that. One thing we'd like to request is last November, we had the city council tour of the construction site, and we'd like to open that offer up again for this coming November. So if we'd like to get that on the schedule and notice it and that type of thing, that would be available. Schedule-wise, on schedule so far. Brian Shirley and I sat down last week and looked at our schedule. We do that every couple of months to look at it, and we're moving along. Our big critical points now are the structural work is actually tapering off, so that's no longer the driver on. The driver on now is equipment deliveries, pipe deliveries. Our big worry right now is electrical deliveries. We have a big switchgear, which is pretty normal for these type of things, but they're long lead items. So get those on site, we'll feel a lot better because we can't energize anything until that's all there. If you want to find out information about the project, you can always reach us at oakharborcleanwater.org. You can call us at 914-7000 for our work extensions. We can be emailed at treatmentplant@oakharbor.org. I did make a mistake on this slide. Our next open house is October 8th. Questions?
Yes, Councilor Muntz.
Thank you. On the recent archaeology finds, I remember that she brought in one council meeting just so that we could show everybody. I thought that was very interesting, and we haven't kind of had an update. If she could bring in some pieces or whatever, just kind of explain some
I
of it
would like to
again?
suggest we do that down at the site where we actually see artifacts from the site. And that would be my suggestion on that when we do the site tour. I'd really love to show you some of the things we have found.
That would be really good, but if there's something small, just because you have your audience here,
Yeah.
for her to explain or have pictures or just something, it would help relate, I think, to.
Well, we're dealing with some confidentiality with
Okay.
with the archaeology until we get the site
Okay.
closed up, and so at this point we can't go just publicly.
Whenever
disseminate.
she can.
Yeah, yeah.
Another question is on your SCADA software. I know that when we toured some of the plants, they had like the big alarm board and
Yeah.
this and that, but they were also able to get communication on their phones
Yes.
that they carried around. That will also do the same?
Yes, we have the ability to use a tablet for that. And we also have screens in every one of our buildings. So it's going to be a very robust system in terms of communication. We're also able to actually operate it off-site if we have to.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, other questions? Councilor Holmberg.
Thank you, Mayor. In most of your presentations, you always conclude or nearly conclude with a production efficiency ratio.
We're still running 105 to 96. Last time the same as
105 what to 96?
105 of production and 96% of labor, which is a good number. As we've been kind of steady with that for the last month.
Thank you.
Councilor Heisen.
Thank you. I don't know if it was at our last meeting or the one before, but you had one of your time-lapse videos, except it went back to the start of construction. And I was looking for that on the oakharborcleanwater.org website to show someone because it was fantastic. And so I couldn't find it. Is that user error or is it not on there?
It's on there. I will confirm that some of those archival things, it may be in the council agenda. It's not a standalone, but I'll make sure to
Okay.
get that. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that would be great if I could give someone an easy place to go to see that. Perfect. That's all I wanted to know.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you, Brett. Nice report. We will now move on to item number 6, public hearings and meetings. To speak during a scheduled public hearing or meeting, please sign in, or you will be given an opportunity anyway after the item is presented. To ensure comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly into the microphone and limit your comments to 3 minutes to ensure all citizens have sufficient time to speak. So we're moving on to item 6A, ordinance number 1801, amending Oak Harbor Municipal Code Title 20, updating the City of Oak Harbor critical area regulations. Looks like I think we have our senior planner, Dennis Lefebvre.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I am making the presentation this evening on the next edition of our critical areas discussion. If you recall, the discussion that we had with council at the July work session, staff came away with basically 3 pieces of work to look at. And as soon as we get the PowerPoint up, Tim, we'll be able to start talking about those. But well, without the PowerPoint, maybe we can move forward anyways. The 3 basic areas that we were going to talk about were the flexibilities that we had already existing in our code that dealt with critical areas as far as development is concerned, the buffer is concerned. And then also we were looking at we were tasked with reaching out to consultants and preparing a scope of work for a review of our wetlands that are in the city, as far as compliance with DOE's rating system, categorization of our wetlands, and we did that. The 2 scopes of works that we received are in your packet. And then the third piece of work that we looked at was a comparison of our proposed recommended wetland buffer areas compared to island counties, which is basically based on their own best available science that they came up with. And we did that. So without the assistance of my PowerPoint, which I must have located in the wrong drive, I apologize for that. At least the first three flow charts that I have are in your packet. So if you want to follow along that way, that would be a great assistance. But what I wanted to reflect was just the various levels of regulations that we already have in our municipal code that deal with flexibilities as far as dealing with critical areas and their buffers. Actually, three titles in our code deal with some type of flexibilities. Title 19, which is our zoning title. Title 21, which is our subdivision title. And of course, Title 20, which is our environmental title. All provide some type of flexibilities as far as dealing with critical areas. In Title 19, we have density bonuses. If there's a planned residential development or a mobile home park or a subdivision that comes in and has some natural features on their property, if they preserve additional amounts of those lands over and above what's required through those applications, they get a density bonus. They can create some additional lots on their property if they preserve additional critical areas. We also have a block flexibility. We also have alternate street designs, which if a property is impacted by a critical area, there's certain pieces of a street profile that we can draw back with to allow the developer to create that street while maintaining the critical area that is impacting that development. Block design, we have standards for our block designs. We have some flexibilities in allowing a single tier of dwelling units, and also the width of a block can be reduced to accommodate the critical areas on the parcel. Referring to Title 20, we have, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, general development regulations which deal with all of the critical areas, all 5 of the critical areas. We also have certain regulations that govern and provide flexibilities for those 5 critical area sets. One of them is exemptions. We have a straight exemption for such things as emergencies, maintenance, repair, education and research facilities, that type of thing. We also have a section in our code that allows some flexibilities with public agency development within critical areas. Utility exceptions where we can give some forgiveness if there's a sewer or a water line that needs to go through critical areas. We also have what we've talked about before, and that's a reasonable use exception, where if a critical area application basically reduces the economic value of that property, we have some flexibility in allowing an exception to that. It is a process that we engage in, and it's a public hearing before the hearings examiner, but there is an option there for the developer to relieve some of that impact of a critical area if it impacts the entire site. We also have a variance for unique physical characteristics of a property. Again, it's a set of criteria that the developer must meet, and it's a hearing before the examiner. So there's a process involved there, but there's some relief that's potential. We have density transfers that are allowed under all of our critical areas. And again, if a parcel is impacted by a certain critical area, a certain percent of the property is basically unusable, 100% of that density that could be on that portion of the property can be located in some other portion of that property so that that developer basically maintains full development rights to his parcel. We also have a set of mitigation standards which are typical for critical areas. It's a range from basically avoiding impact to the critical areas to actual mitigation, compensation, off-site development of compensation for that critical area, whether it be a wetland or wildlife habitat. So those are options that are directly available to all critical areas. The next flow chart basically identifies what is specific to the wetland portion of the critical areas. And again, exemptions are allowed in the wetland portion. We do have exemptions for Category 4 wetlands, which are less than 4,000 square feet. We have exemptions for wetlands that are less than 1,000 square feet. Basically, categories 3 and 2, we don't have that exemption allowed for Category 1 wetlands, but that just means that they can impact portions of the buffer, and through review and appropriate mitigation, they could utilize development within the buffer of those size wetlands. As far as buffers for wetlands are concerned, we have a variety of, we actually have 3 different types of allowances that we do with development within buffers. We have a straight reduction of a buffer that's allowed that can be permitted by the Director of the Development Services. We allow up to a 75% reduction of the buffer when associated with the Category 2 and 3 wetland. And we have a 25% reduction in the buffer allowed in a Category 4 wetland. I think we've mentioned in the past that we also address buffer averaging. That's where you can take a piece of the buffer away for a development proposal, slide it to another piece of the buffer and add it to it. One of the principles of buffer averaging is that there's no net loss of that buffer. Take a piece away, you got to add the piece somewhere else. We also have allowed uses identified in our code for buffers. We have passive recreation allowed. We have educational, scientific research activities allowed. Maintenance and repair is allowed, as well as stormwater facilities are allowed in buffers of the wetland. Now, my next slide. Oh, hey, we have it. Wonderful. Let me just scroll down here. Okay, we had scopes of work presented to us from 2 firms, Environmental Science Associates and the Watershed Company, to kind of give us a ballpark figure as to what it would take for those professional firms to look at our wetlands and maybe do some categorization for us and some analysis of our buffer determinations. We did receive those back. Both firms essentially would do a field investigation, look at probably a handful or so. I think one was quoted as saying 6 to 8 wetlands they would look at, which is pretty much all of the wetlands that we have in the city. They would apply the 2014 Department of Ecology rating system and do a categorization of those wetlands. They would also analyze the best available science and also the regulatory buffers that we were proposing. Neither firm would do a wetland delineation. That's certainly more manpower and time required to do that. And the prices that I have quoted up there is incorrect. And I apologize that I must have an old calculator. But the price actually provides a range from, for the Watershed Company, it's $15,480. I mean, the ESA, and then the Watershed Company is $17,694. So I apologize for that error. Some of the pluses and minuses that we as staff saw with the potential incorporation of consultants to look at our buffers. Of course, that's certainly the council's call. But one of the pluses is we would have most of our wetlands categorized in conformance with the Department of Ecology rating system. Another plus that we saw is we would also have our buffers reviewed by professional wetland personnel, so that, you know, it wouldn't be a staff-driven issue. It would be reviewed more of a on a professional basis. Some of the minuses we saw with bringing on a consultant to do some of this work, obviously it would push out the adoption of the critical areas probably about 6 months when you look at doing the RFP, that process, and then actually having them do the scope of work. The costs of this piece of work is not included in the development services budget at this point in time. And quite frankly, that doesn't guarantee us that after their analysis and review, the buffer widths would be reduced. It could actually be basically the same that we are proposing in our ordinance at this point in time. It's hard to say. The last piece that I'd like to present is an analysis that we did basing or between the Department of Ecology's recommended buffers and Island County, who actually created their own best available science. It was somewhat of an apples and oranges exercise, but the best I could do was come up with Island County has 5 wetland categories. DOE has 4. Island County looks at their wetlands from 2 perspectives, one from a water quality perspective, the other from a habitat perspective. They actually have 2 exercises, one to look at the water quality, one to look at the habitat. The buffers that are recommended then are reviewed, and the widest is then implemented of those 2 perspectives. DOE, I practice this word, so I'm going to try to say it. Hydrogeomorphic classes is what they base their categorization on. They do also on hydraulic and geomorphic conditions. They also rolled into the whole analysis the wildlife habitat aspect. So when they come up with categorization, the buffer is applied at one time, and it's not a double buffer. It's not, the widest buffer is applicable. It's the one buffer that applies according to the Department of Ecology. Further analysis kind of showed that Island County buffers tend to be wider for the lower category of wetlands, where Department of Ecology's proposed recommended buffers seem to be wider for the higher category wetlands, category 1s and 2s. And also of note, any state or federal project is required to use the Department of Ecology rating system. So one of the drawbacks from having your own best available science is the state or whatever federal agency is doing that has to do 2 basic analyses on their wetlands, one according to the state and then one according to the local jurisdiction that has their approved system. So that can delay a project for a length of time. Visually, I tried to show and match up the buffers that are being proposed here in the city of Oak Harbor. Obviously, the category 1s are a higher width buffer. The type A under Island County is kind of their special and sensitive wetland areas. Their buffers are 90 to 250. The other 4 categories under Island County, again, are based on the 2 perspectives that they use, the habitat buffers and the water quality buffers. And you can see the range. It's fairly high in the lower category wetlands, where the DOE recommended wetland widths reduce according to the category sensitivity. So with that, staff is continuing to, based on the information that we are presenting tonight, carrying forth the Planning Commission recommendation and staff's recommendation that you move forward with adoption of Ordinance 1801. At this point, I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. Before we take it up here at council, I'd like to open this to the public and ask if anyone would like to speak to this topic. Okay, seeing none, no mad rush to the podium, we'll bring it back to the council. So, Councilor Almberg.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Lefebvre, I had conversations with staff, including you, recently, that staff has been in communication with DOE regarding not only this particular topic, but also issues about rainfall as it relates to the LID. Do you recall those in our meetings, our discussions about that? We had several items that you guys were in communication with them.
Yes.
Have you received any confirmed, any written response to them regarding allowing us to use a lower rainfall, or prepared to support a minimum setback for man-made structures and drainage corridors?
There were two questions there, correct?
Yes.
One was, have I seen anything that is in writing from the Department of Ecology
On
allowing
either
us?
either one of the topics.
I
or
am,
both of
I'm
them?
not in front of that project. I would like to defer that to Dr. Merriman if I could.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
To answer your questions here, we haven't received anything back. I know last week we had our discussions about man-made structures and the buffers and setbacks on that. And those are the items that when we spoke today, Ms. Stromberg, we wanted to get those speaking points to ecology to see if we can find some leeway when those structures in the wetland areas are man-made versus natural-made. So we'll have that probably going out soon after we hear these discussions tonight and then see what feedback we get from ecology on that idea.
Thank you. And I'm personally inclined to support this when we have answers to those particular topics, because those are headline topics for this community. I would like to allow staff to continue to work with DOE to modify or at least come up with a minimum setback, particularly on the man-made structures and drainage corridors. Also allow staff time to work with DOE to develop a stormwater management plan that recognizes the low rainfall in our region versus the Western Washington model. We've kicked that one around. It sounds like we're making some headway on that. There's some possibility with that. Even though this is not totally into the critical areas ordinance, it's still an integral part of that ordinance, the way we handle stormwater. And also, we've had this discussion too, and I'm not saying that the staff doesn't do this, but I would like to say that it would be helpful if we had a written policy that staff shall emphasize the approved exemptions that are listed in that manual. That manual is pretty thick, and often in a preliminary plat application or preliminary application related to stormwater, it's pretty onerous for the staff to really go into a highlight of the entire manual, and often the exemptions get left out. That's been my experience, not necessarily criticizing Oak Harbor City staff, but in any jurisdiction I've been, nobody goes to the exemption to say, well, you don't have to do that if you do it this way. And that would really be helpful, I think, for the image of this city and also for the applicants trying to go forward. The other thing we talked about is, and we discussed this, is in the LID stormwater requirements, we have to do the soil classifications and do a number of things that are considered approved LID concepts. One of them is the soils classifications that have to go on throughout the entire plat, and I'm referring to plats at this time, the entire site, and then after that we have to do additional engineering and soils classifications for individual building lots. So, if you have let's say you have a 60 lot plat in there, you do one for the plat and then you do 60 of them again. And these are some of the reasons why we're having a difficult time providing affordable housing. And what I would like to see, and I don't know why DOA wouldn't go with this, is to have a classification at the beginning of the project that these are the typical soils on this site, and therefore these are the standards that you would follow within the LID approved concepts. With respect to the RFPs for getting a wetland biologist to delineate this, I'd support an RFP for the city wetland delineation contract. I consider this an emergency for critical areas and stormwater LID regulations are examples of why, and I just said housing is really lacks affordability. And the funds I know are not in the general fund, but the council could declare an emergency, and those funds could be drawn out of the stabilization fund, which would at least help us have an independent look at our wetland buffers. And there's no reason to wait on do that. We don't want to do this in the rainy season. We want to do it in the dry season. And that's all I have to say. So if we want to talk about money at some point to do the RFPs, I hate to wait 6 months to do these things. And I don't like kicking the can down the road, but I'm not willing, and I'm not able to support this as it is right now until we get additional information from DOE and the staff.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Counselor. How about other, Counselor Servadius?
Thank you, Mayor. So when I saw this come up again, I was intrigued, excited, looking forward to what has changed since we last saw it the last several times, and I appreciate the work the staff has done. One of the critical points for me was in the statute, it says that we can develop our best or utilize our own science, and you referenced that in the slideshow. You talked about Island counties. Some of the comparisons you did that caught my eye were Island County, their buffers are wider. They have a lot more land to work with. So I get concerned when we talk about a very small footprint as far as our city limits. I want to keep those buffers as small as possible. I want to be a good steward of the resources, a good steward of the environment, all of that. But at the same time, I'm concerned about the long-term impacts when we can't get, I mean, the number one topic we keep coming up with, Mr. Allenberg mentioned it, is this housing issue. You also mentioned the state might have to do 2 studies, one at the state level and then one with the local statutes. I'm okay with that. The state may not want to do that, but if we had to do that, I'm okay with that. One of the things I noticed was different in this packet versus all the other ones. Normally when we get these, they have the legislative edits. This did not. Was there a reason for that?
Legislative edits as
It
far
made it
as
very
references
difficult
to certain...
changes. It made it very difficult to compare. When we see this, I had to go back and reference the previous packets. When we look at what's changed in this packet, normally we see the strike-throughs, the edits. We didn't have that this time, so it was a fairly material change in the way the packet was presented.
It was a conscious choice, Mr. Servadius, because we provided to council both the legislative edit and the clean versions on more than one occasion. We were just trying to cut down on the size of the packet.
Okay.
We felt that there has been no change in the text of the code. We were only responding to the questions that were raised at your July 26th workshop. We were just trying to reduce the overall size of the packet.
Okay. For me personally, I appreciate the edits because it's easy to see where the changes are when you just have 100 pages of text. It's very hard, and I went back through the other packets to see if there were any changes. One of the things I noticed the other day, I was driving through the Walmart parking lot, and there's a little drainage ditch, and I don't know how long Walmart's been there, 10 years, and there's cattails growing in that little swale that's cut right there between, it's just a little strip of grass that's now growing cattails. And I think it was one of our planning commissioners made a reference to that, or someone did, that what if we create a wetland? And if you want to touch on that, I remember, I think it was in the workshop, someone said if we create a wetland, it's a wetland forever. But I still struggle with, if we create a little drainage swale, and all of a sudden we have cattails growing, and if it's hydric soil, is that the correct term? That we're now, let's say, they want to lop off a little section of that parking lot and so let someone put in an espresso stand or any kind of retail operation or whatever, that's a limiting factor that we created. So that gives me pause still very much on this.
I think to follow up on that point, what I've done is actually included the wetland definition that we all have to use under GMA. Not so much this first slide, but getting to your point is what's on the second slide as far as intentionally created, what is not considered a wetland, what have you. So I do have that available. I also have it in paper copy if you'd like to. Okay. To review that more at your leisure. Some of that wording is fuzzy at best, not to degrade the state legislature, but it's not a clear definition of wetlands, but it shows that irrigation and drainage ditches, grass lines, swales, canals, detention facilities, wastewater treatment facilities, farm ponds, landscape amenities are not considered wetlands. And I think to argue with you, that little swale area between, I think it's Safeway and Walmart, would be considered a grass-lined swale. And it just happens to have cattails growing out of it. We would not consider that a wetland, according to this definition.
Okay, it still just gives me pause, but, and I'm probably leaning towards Mr. Allenberg here, that at this point, I don't see anything materially that's changed since we saw this on the 26th. As far as the two studies that we have here, I would wholly support those. I know you made mention that the Development Services budget obviously didn't budget for those. I know that we've gone a month or two without a building official. I don't know if there's some resources that were freed up there. Maybe that's a naive question, but.
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Actually, it would just take a budget adjustment to move funds to cover the cost of the study. We wouldn't have to tap into our reserve account or anything like that. So it's fairly simple to make that happen.
And I would very much support that, to get a little more science behind this before we move forward. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. So we're not really under the gun pressure that this has to be passed tonight. Am I mistaken on that, or?
So I'm glad that you asked the question, Ms. Munns, because I was going to respond to that point. We had a deadline of June 30th of this year to complete our work on this, as the council is aware of that. We've been, I think, consistent in our comments to you that when you don't meet that deadline, you are considered to be non-compliant with GMA, that a little extra time is probably not a big deal. And I don't know where that line is.
Okay.
Okay, I'll be honest with you with that. I think the point behind the slide that Mr. Lefevre had in the presentation that says that, going through this additional study will roughly take at least 6 months, would push us well past the beginning of the new year. I think it would be very easy to say that you are definitely non-compliant with GMA at that point.
But we have lots of evidence from our meetings and workshops that we're working on this.
Absolutely.
And we have asked good questions, and we're looking for best science, so.
And that's an excellent point. So it's not as if we are sitting on our hands doing nothing, or we said, oh my gosh, we forgot about that deadline. So, we could certainly demonstrate that we are working diligently towards achieving that goal. I think, as we've said in one of the previous meetings, that the practical result of that probably really is not a non-compliance order from the Growth Management Hearings Board. The more practical result for the City of Oak Harbor is just affects our ability to apply for certain funding sources. And even in that, as I said, I think either in July or prior to that, where that was most relevant were for grant sources which really haven't existed for a good number of years, namely from the Department of Commerce. We do know that whether or not you are GMA compliant has some bearing on RCO when we look at Parks and Rec grants or park grants, but it's not a disqualifier. It just means that we would not be able to achieve full number of points for that particular section. So, are we under the gun? I can't tell you that. Are we past our deadline? Absolutely. Are we being diligent in trying to achieve our goal of getting GMA compliant? Yes, I think that we are.
This comment may seem off the wall, but we were trying to fix something that we inherited from the county with Lysex property, and suddenly ecology says, oh, but there could be salmon swimming up the cliff to get to that water, and we had to stop work. I want us to be careful about this. How they could even think that, but it stopped work for I don't know how long, because they said, oh, but that water's coming down. You could have salmon just hop up that cliff on Scenic Heights Road and want to be in that little bit of water. So I want to be sure we look at all of this, and I think my personal opinion is we're doing due diligence, that I can't see that they would come back with a hard hammer and say, you didn't pass this. So I know you're giving us the correct, but that's just my feeling that if they can stop work for something I think is incomprehensible, but anyway.
So I know council understands this, that staff understands your frustration. And we understand what the common denominator is for some of that frustration. It is our state agencies of the alphabet nature. Not necessarily just DOE, but those from that alphabet group. We understand that that's the common denominator for this source of frustration. And frankly, it frustrates us as well, as the folks who are trying to help the community get through these processes. We certainly want you to have the information that you think is necessary in order for you to feel comfortable in putting into place new code for the city of Oak Harbor. We're also just trying to make sure that we're fulfilling our professional obligation and telling you what we think the potential pitfalls are or obstacles are. For instance, undertaking a study where there's no guarantee that the resulting answer will provide buffers of a smaller size. And so that's just something that it's our obligation to point out to you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go forward. It just means we want you to be aware of that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have.
Councilor Heisen?
Thank you. Could you refresh my memory? I'm not seeing it immediately here, but the cost for the study, one was 17 and change, and one was 15?
They were very close in range, yes. 17,694 for the watershed company and 15,480 for ESA.
My question is it possible to update our critical area regulations after updating our critical area regulations? What would happen if we updated it tonight and we're in compliance and we proceed with the study, and based on what it says, can we update it again, or is that not how this works? Is there a timeline?
As in a future amendment to the ordinance?
Yeah, amend, sorry, it was a better word than update.
My knee-jerk reaction is yes. I mean, you have that authority to amend an ordinance based on maybe additional information.
Because as Mr. Powers pointed out, if we do spend the money and we get this study, we have to be prepared to not like the answer. They might come back with exactly what we've already been told. They might come back with a revelation that makes a lot more sense to all of us. So if there's nothing stopping us from doing both, just for my own comfort level to be compliant with the GMA, I would be in favor of adopting this ordinance and proceeding with the study, and then moving forward based on what the results of that study are, if we can do that. So it's just my feeling.
Thank you. Councilor Heisen. Anyone else like to? Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Lefebvre, when these critical area regulations first came to the council, there were concerns, and one of the concerns is the increase in the buffer, and increasing the buffer weeds will potentially restrict developable lands. And I asked a question before about the legality of these and the city's responsibility or liability to reimburse the property owner if we increase the buffer. Do we still have this? The city is liable for that?
As I began my presentation tonight, we went through a variety of different options that we already have in code to allow flexibilities when there's an impact to a developer from a wetland or a wetland buffer. We still have those in code, and those aren't going to go away. So we have a lot of flexibilities. Even though we do increase the buffer according to DOE's recommendation, we still have those tools in our toolbox that we can use to help a developer with his parcel.
Yes, and you made presentation of those flexibility in different categories of the areas. And is this state regulation that local agencies has to follow, and the property owners don't have a recourse of restricting the buffer to the wetland?
As far as reducing the buffer width?
Yes.
Well, what we have in code is what's been recommended by ecology. Steve, I don't know if I'm going off track, but So that's what we're proposing at this point in time. Who knows what the consultants might come back with as far as basing their recommended buffers on what they consider best available science might reduce the buffer width, may not. But again, that's what we're basing, our recommended buffers on, is what being recommended by Department of Ecology.
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you,
Mr. Begala, I think the phenomena that you're describing is generally referred to as a regulatory takings. In other words, the application of the rules, if it's going to remove the economic use of a particular piece of property. We work very, very, very hard to make sure that that doesn't happen, because that's one of the things that the state says that we can't do. In fact, there's guidance from the State Attorney General's office that tells us how to avoid having a regulatory takings. That's why within our code we have those different layers that Mr. Lefevre has explained to the council, that is specifically in place to make sure that we don't get to a position where the application of the rules would remove the ability for that property to be used to an economic benefit. And so there are different administrative steps, and if none of those work for whatever reason, then there's the reasonable use exception provision, which allows us to take that application to the hearing examiner and make the case to the hearing examiner as to why these rules are so drastically affecting a particular piece of property, if that was the case. And so that is specifically there to prevent that liability that you're talking about. Because if we would allow that liability to occur, then we have all sorts of problems on our hands.
So the property owner has a recourse of going to the hearing examiner.
Yes, sir. And again, that's specifically there. And the reason that you have that at the hearing examiner, I think, is to provide that balanced perspective, right? That dispassionate, balanced perspective as to whether or not that thing in front of him, that application in front of him, makes sense or not, given the context of the rules. And so that's our last step to make sure that we're not in that regulatory takings process. We've never gotten there in my 19 years with the city. The application of the administrative tools have always been sufficient to preserve the number of dwelling units that might otherwise have been built on that piece of property, to have figured out a way for that same commercial square footage footprint to occur on that particular piece of property. So the administrative tools which are available to us have always worked up until this point in time, and I frankly have no reason to believe that they won't continue to work.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Thank you, Mr. Lefevre. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, anyone else? Councilor Wassinger?
Yes, thank you. I too agree with, I think this issue is important enough for our community to look at the studies that are proposed. I'm not sure how far in the process we are with those RFPs and what still needs to do. We have to put that out again for any other companies, but I would certainly agree to get going on that process. That's how I would feel about that, and would certainly entertain a motion to move forward with the studies. Thank you.
Councilor Servadius?
Thank you, Mayor. I like to think that I'm of average intelligence, but then I read this and I definitely doubt that assumption. This starts out, wetlands do not include those artificial wetlands intentionally created from non-wetland sites, including but not limited to everything we just talked about. And then it ends with, wetlands may include those artificial wetlands intentionally created from non-wetland areas. And I'm guessing it's in the last 4 words there, but help me understand how
Clear
they
as
didn't.
mud, isn't it?
They just didn't say but.
Yeah.
And scrape the whole thing right before it.
I would need to do some additional investigation as to how that's been defined. Okay, Steve?
You're right, Mr. Servadius, it is those last words of the very last line. So let's work our way through, but I'll start at the beginning of that last sentence. Wetlands may include those artificial wetlands intentionally created from non-wetland areas. So let's stop right there. Wetlands which were built from property that was not previously wetland, created to mitigate conversion of wetlands. So in a situation where you've actually gained approval to fill wetlands at this location, and you build new wetlands here in a non-wetland area, those created wetlands have to continue to be considered wetlands, because these are the new ones which are being built to offset your filling of these. Our real-life example of that, for those of you who may recall the development of the Cherry Hill project up there off of Crosby Road. There were a number of small wetlands in there. That developer actually received permission to fill in those wetlands. The place that they created the wetlands to mitigate the filling of those was down along what is now Bayshore Drive and Beeksma Drive. So they built wetlands in that area. They created those wetlands, and you build them like 6-to-1 ratio for what you filled in. And now forevermore, that wetland which was built has to be continued to be considered a wetland.
Thank you, and that was my best assumption. Now, please indulge me, the public and my peers. Mr. Powers, jump back up there. I've actually had this conversation with Mr. Powers. I enjoy that wetland that was created. It used to be a pond and there were ducks in there. That wetland behind 7-Eleven Burger King is predominantly now filled in with cattails. And my question to you is, could we ever dredge some of that back to create that wetland pond? And maybe you just superficially, when I was in your office one day, say, no, not really, it's a wetland, we can't disturb it. Could we ever get a permit to dredge? Still going to be a wetland, but I just want to see the ducks in the water back.
So first off, I don't think we'd ever want to use the D word when we're talking about a wetland.
Improve it?
We would find another turn of phrase which would be slightly less intrusive or impactful than the dredge word.
Okay.
We've never entertained the idea of going back in and trying to improve the wetland characteristics, but it's probably not dissimilar from what a developer could do on his or her property that maybe has a wetland and a buffer which is not of the highest quality, and we talk about enhancing that buffer. I think it's possible then to entertain the idea that we would enhance the existing wetland area. In fact, the wetland that we're referring to, some of the way that was constructed was there was a small piece of existing wetland in that corner, and then they dug an area around it to expand the boundaries of that wetland. I don't recall for sure, but it's possible that part of that work involved changing the contours of that existing piece of wetland. Okay. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that if you went through the appropriate studies and demonstrated that you weren't going to negatively affect the functions of that wetland, that you couldn't go in and improve it.
Right. I'd like to restore that artificial wetland. Improve it. So the concern then I know this is maybe a leap of logic, but if we had a large parcel, there's a corner down here that has wetlands. If they don't choose to mitigate it off-site, but we move it over here or something, and that's an artificially created wetland, and that starts to, it's that bottom sentence, if that is a wetland that got moved from over here, but then these property owners next to it now have to deal with that wetland that got moved over there.
So, yes, sort of. That relocation of a wetland it's not done in a vacuum. And first of all, it's only happened, I think, 1 or 2 times again in my time here. One of our previous conversations on this topic, we talked about what the sequencing is. The first choice is you don't impact the wetland at all, right? That's kind of a given. The next choice is that if you're going to change it somehow and you need to mitigate it, you mitigate it on that site. So you don't shift that wetland someplace else. And then the next choice is that you do it in the same drainage basin, and finally the very last choice is you do it completely someplace else. But that someplace else, whether it's in that same drainage basin or way outside of it, still assumes that you have the property owner permission, who is the receiving end of that wetland. And so it's a known impact that we're creating. The other thing, and I do think that this bears further examination on our part, and we'd be happy to do this. My recollection is that once those wetlands are created, that the buffers that were created at the time of the approval of that wetland are the buffers which apply to that wetland, that they don't grow over time as our rules may change. I want us to verify that, but that is really my sense of that, because it does otherwise create a potential problem for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I've heard a couple things here tonight. A couple of councilors talked about not taking action, one that did. I'm not sure how the council wants to move forward. Yes, Councilor Heisen.
I'd be curious to know how the rest of the council feels about the proposal to adopt and go forward with the study. I'm not sure if there's anything specifically to be gained or lost from either option.
Okay, I think
Like,
we heard.
I
think we heard from Allenberg, but go ahead, Councilor Allenberg.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not in favor of supporting going forward on some action on this, and because it's not just the wetlands buffer for me, and it's not such a hidden agenda either, but this issue about our drainage based on drainage design based on our rainfall, things like that, and the soils analysis over the site for a general plat evaluation is still part of the conversation. And as soon as, at least I believe, and this is taken no criticism towards our staff, and I appreciate what you guys do, and ladies, once we pass this on, it's no longer part of the conversation. It's going to be backburnered, and the thing that just as much as we have to resolve the buffer issue, we have to resolve the LID issue on stormwater. Right now, DOE is talking to staff. They have a conversation going. They have a good dialogue. That part has to go forward for me. And I don't think it's all that bad of an idea to have a little bit of pushback with DOE once in a while on some of these types of conversations. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, any feelings one way or the other?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Concerning the subject matter on the presented by Mr. Armberg concerning the LID issue, which on the storm drain, will it be possible that passing this agenda bill and the staff continue working with the state concerning the issue on our island is different from other locations concerning the rainfall that we receive? It's about the issue on LID on the storm drain.
My belief is that work would definitely continue. You could take action on this ordinance this evening. That action would still continue as far as moving forward, and correspondence with DOE on both of those issues would continue.
I guess the next question will be on what assurance will have that the issue will continue, that you work with the state or Department of Ecology to do that.
That is a very good question for Dr. Merriman.
No, it's good. And Mr. Allenberg and I talked about that earlier today. I think staff is very clear on the direction City Council has talked about, and I'd have to say staff is right in line with you as well. We can see the costs that some of the LID features would do on our community and the per lot cost of development and that, and we don't want to see that happen either. So I think the discussions we're having with ecology are very good ones. And we've been doing a lot of work, working with Mr. Allenberg, working with Department of Ecology to see what options we have. Earlier, we talked about exemptions when it comes to rainfall and looking at the best practices in that. And we have some ideas of some things that we want to throw out there with ecology and get a letter off to them and get an official response from them. So seeing how important this has been to council and seeing how important it is to our community, we would keep it up there topmost in our work plan and continue working on this with ecology and see what results we can get.
Councilor Munns?
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move that the council fund to hire one of the two companies, I think it was, what, 15 to just under 18,000, to study, because I think it would help with our best science for our area to fit our community, and pay for that, if you think the money is there without having to go in the emergency budget. I move we pay for a study and hire one of the companies that has given us a bid.
Second?
Yeah. Necessarily, we would have to go through the process of an RFP. We technically couldn't say it would be one or the other at this point in time.
But the motion is to hire one or the other. So we have a motion and a second to hire one or the other as presented tonight. Any other discussion? Yes, Councilor Servatius.
I think the concern, as I heard the motion, was to authorize the funds to hire a consultant. Staff's concern might be it should go out to an RFP to not necessarily pre-select one of those two.
Okay.
Just clarifying the motion.
Clarifying the motion.
Yes.
So do we have anything to, that you might be able to read, Nikki?
I sure do, Mayor Severance. All right, Councilmember Munns moved, in her words, to fund and hire one of the two companies to study, help with the best available science for our community, and pay for that. This motion was seconded by Councilmember Allenberg. That was verbatim.
Councilor Servatius.
Would you please read that one more time?
Councilmember Munns moved to fund and hire one of the two companies to study and help with the best science for our community and pay for that. Motion was seconded by Councilmember Allenberg.
Okay, Dr. Merriman, did you have a comment?
If I can make a suggestion, I think we see the intent of the motion Ms. Munns is wanting to make. Perhaps if we withdrew that motion and pulled that back and make a re-motion to direct staff to proceed forward with issuing an RFP for this study. And then we can go through our normal acquisition process to make that selection.
Councilor
I
Munns?
remove my motion.
And I remove my second.
I don't think once you've made the motion, I was going to simplify it with striking. It goes to the body, yeah, it's not yours anymore.
Motion's still at the body.
Yeah, you can withdraw if it hasn't been seconded.
You can vote on it and deny it.
But it has been seconded.
Ready to vote? All in favor, say aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Sounds pretty unanimously opposed. So the suggested motion is to, did you get that from Dr. Merriman? To,
Sure, I can repeat that for you. Motion to direct staff to proceed forward with an RFP process for selecting the study as presented.
So moved.
Second.
so, anybody want the motion reread? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. So we still have a recommended action. Council like to, what would council like to do? Councilor Allenberg?
Thank you, Mayor. I would make a motion that we take no action on this item. And where's my agenda?
You can't move to not
It's a motion, or you can just do nothing.
So the council would like to do nothing?
Yeah.
It looks like we're doing nothing right now.
You paid to do nothing.
Okay, I guess we'll move on. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to move on to item number 8, contracts and agreements, Clean Water Facility, Carollo Engineers Consultant Agreement Amendment number 18, Effluent Reuse. Seeing our engineer Brett Arvidsson.
Good evening again. This is for our Clean Water Facility Effluent Reuse System. It's amendment number 18 for Carollo Engineers, our consultant agreement. Give you some background on this. Our new clean water facility will produce a high quality effluent. Right now we're just planning on pumping it into the bay. This water is available for other purposes such as irrigation. If you look at the water of a glass of our drinking water and a glass of our effluent, you would be able to tell the difference visually from them. So we would think that would be, it's a resource to use. And the city right now spends $40,000 a year irrigating Windjammer Park. And that's just the 3 meters we actually have down there doing the park irrigation. So this actually has payback to us. With the Windjammer Park upgrades that we are going ahead with, incorporating effluent into that project would be very easily because we're rebuilding most of the irrigation system already. So we feel this has a lot of positive benefits for the city. I like the cost payback on it. It's pretty aggressive, so I'm looking forward to it. This is our phase one. It's our phasing map for Windjammer Park. Right now, it's about 26 acres. About 15 to 20 acres of that is irrigatable. Unfortunately, implementing the effluent reuse is just not hooking up a pipe and turning on the faucet. We have to go through a process on that. Reuse will require a DOE approval through our MPDS permit process. As we get ready to start up the new treatment plant, we do have to negotiate a new permit with the state. It is ineligible for eligible costs with our SRF funding loans. I'm also looking possibly we have a green reserve part of that loan, and that's actually a grant, so we could use maybe this for that part. The DOE requires effluent reuse plan that documents the operational parameters of the system. Basically, we have to say who, what, where, when, why, and how. It is considered an outfall in our permits. Most of what we have to do to it is piping and mechanical modifications, and mostly it's for disinfection. We're using UV for our disinfection when it goes in the harbor. If we do effluent reuse, we actually have a chlorine residual like we do with our drinking water. We also have to supply pressure. We don't have use 70 psi to irrigate with. We'd have to do some modifications to the park system. Our big issue there is we'd have to install purple pipe because reuse has a special piping classification. It's still PVC pipe, it's just colored purple. We do have to do signage and education. We're not allowed to put faucets out there so somebody can't go up and drink it, but we do want to tell people that we're using it. And it's also it's a good communication with the community that we are doing reuse and environmental stewardship. One thing I do want to make a point on is reuse cannot be used for any consumptive purposes, and that's like the splash park or any fountains or any water features we have in the project, because that's got potential for human contact or for somebody to drink it. So definitely not going to be used for those purposes. So do this, we got with Carollo to evaluate this. Our scope of work would involve evaluating the best way of doing that. There's some options inside the treatment plant. We have to look at areas of redundancy, some mechanical, electrical parts of it. We do use this water for our utility water system inside the treatment plant, so certain processes like cooling or sprays, that stuff, we actually have this, so we have to make sure the system works with that system and we don't have any conflicts there. We have to design the mechanical changes, which are supply pumps, storage, a lot of cross-connection control, and like I said, residual disinfection. We do have to prepare a reuse plan that goes into our permit. It's something we have to use and conform to. DO does need to approve our drawings and our engineering design for that, which is part of our normal plant review process anyway. And we also want to use Carollo's team to assist with our public education, so we get that together. Amendment number 18 is number 18 to our contract. It's been a lot of them. Basically, it involves Carollo EnviroIssues as our PR people and Greenworks as the landscape architect. The amendment cost is $78,432. Our total contract with the after this amendment would be $17,947,421. The construction work will actually be incorporated in what we call GMP number 13, which is the final Windjammer Park construction. We will incorporate into that. If we do start the system, it probably occur in the spring of 2019. By the time we get the park ready, we probably won't be able to irrigate in the 2018, so we'll probably actually be doing irrigating that summer. So we do have a recommended action for the mayor to sign contract amendment number 18. Questions?
Okay, before we take it up here at the council level, I'd like to ask if there's any input from anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this or ask a question. Okay, seeing none. Council. Yes, Councilor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Arson, I thought at one point we were still going to try to market the sale of the purple pipe water, like to golf courses that need irrigation or someone else, because it is safe for that.
Yes.
So with this plan, there would still be a way if someone had a water truck to hook up and they wanted to have that water so they could truck it to where they need to water the greens or whatever.
Yes, and that's part of the plan, is we'd have the ability. People driving up for trucks is pretty unlikely, but though it could happen. Like, for example, our own sewer cleaning equipment, we have trucks that they would actually want. We used to use this water for those type of purposes. Like I say, if we wanted to market it wider, it's more of a question of what is the cost to get it to that location. So say you have a golf course, what's it take to get to the golf course? And on the east side of the mountains, this is actually very common. So we had that ability. This system would give us that ability, and it's just a question, as we get a new site, we would add that to our permit.
Okay, and another statement you made was that the splash park couldn't use it. I thought that the three-city wastewater treatment plant in Olympia that we went to, and they have like a brook going through that the kids play in, that was effluent water.
I'm not familiar with that. We've had discussions with the health department, and that's generally frowned upon, yeah. But it's something we could talk.
Councilor Olmert.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, to shed a little light on that particular one, that was the lot, the Lacey Olympic Tumwater facility, and they explained to us that they got a swimming pool permit but they recycle the water through the process. It's not just origin and then out of, outflow. That would be a potential issue on that. But I have some other questions on this. Will this amendment, $78,000, require any modification to the existing design of the wastewater treatment plant that will result in a change order to Hoffman's contract? And if it does, how much?
The construction cost is still, we have to do with the alternatives. What we would do then is incorporate that construction cost into GMP number 13 and go through the procurement on that. Mostly it's involving, like the purple pipe would be brought into the project, mostly be involved with any storage or supply chemical systems inside the plant.
Well, the answer is yes, it would.
There would be some cost involved,
So, but we don't know what that cost is.
At this point, we haven't, not until we do this.
So we really can't compare the $78,000 to the $40,000 in the cost of irrigation water.
But we're talking a couple $100,000 in that range.
Okay, but then we're going to have both a potable water and a purple water system in Windjammer Park.
What we would do then is inside the plant, excuse me, we have to have some kind of storage reservoir, and we'd be able to feed that reservoir both from our city water or from our effluent water. It's called an air gap system, and that's one of the things we have to look at inside.
Well, you'd still have two
Yeah,
systems
you
in
still
the
have two
park, though,
systems, right.
for public use.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, we don't really know what the cost of that is either. You know, are we now all of a sudden talking about let's see, 78,000, now we got 200,000, and are we going to throw in now another 300 or 400,000 for putting in a whole purple pipe irrigation system?
The irrigation system cost is already in the Windjammer estimate because we had to rebuild the irrigation system anyway.
Okay.
So it's just a difference in pipe type.
Okay. So this is going to turn into about a $300,000 thing
And
by
that would
this
be
action.
my guess at this point.
I'll remember that.
I know.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Servadius.
Thank you. This is probably going to come across as a little critical of staff, and it may be. How did we get here? We've talked about purple pipe since inception. I've seen the hole coming out of the side of the building on the north side that has purple pipe. Brian Matson from Carollo has been in multiple rooms since inception when we've talked about utilizing purple pipe. Why now are we paying 78 grand for them to reconfigure inside the plant how to use purple pipe?
That's a good question, and you have to remember that the mechanical design is a very small part of the 78,000. A big part of the cost is actually preparing the reuse water plan for that. And it comes down to the decision, as we moved ahead with the design, we've always had it on our radar to do reuse water, but until we really knew what was going to happen in the park, there's some certain regulatory issues right now in terms of renewal of our NPDES permit that had to begin those discussions. So we really didn't want to make that investment until we were sure that's something we really wanted to do.
But from day one, I've used the term, I could go back and watch the video several times, that park should look like Bouchard Gardens. There's no doubt that we all wanted to use reclaimed water wherever possible. So
Yeah.
I'm now baffled that we're spending, this is a bit of a fleecing, I feel, on the part of these consultants, or somebody dropped the ball big time here. If it's 78,000 just for the study, and then as Mr. Almberg just implied, that it's several $100,000 of mechanics inside the plant, we knew we'd need pipe because we're tearing up a lot of the park.
Yeah.
I'm not okay with that. And that's all I'll say on that. The other thing is, before we get together again, can someone please pick up the phone and call Watt? Because that discussion has come up over the past year and a half as to how they use reclaimed water in their splash park. And everybody giggles and says, oh, hey, yeah, okay, we'll figure that out. Could someone please call Watt and report back to the council exactly what type of a permit they're using so we can decide whether to use that permit rather than using water from Anacortes to just run through there daily. I know we're trying to conserve it with buttons, but some of these questions that keep coming up, and I just like an answer to. Thank you.
Other council? Yes, Councilor Heisman.
I agree wholeheartedly. This was the idea since the inception of, oh, we can use this to do this, this, and this. And so, not surprisingly, we expected that this was already built into everything we've approved from here. If this was a brand new idea, oh, that's a great idea. But this isn't a brand new idea. So I'm also a little confused. And I understand that there are particulars now that we know what we're doing with the park, and that there were details to be worked out later. But maybe I need some clarification in terms of whether this is just about those details that we couldn't work out in the beginning, or if this is kind of being brought to us as a new concept starting from here. Can you answer that?
I think
in terms of
the driver on it is the renewal of our NPDES permit. We have been operating under the old NPDES permit, and like I said earlier, a lot of this study is actually the requirements to meet the NPDES requirements. That's a permit that we operate under, and the reuse water plan is when we get the permit, that is actually an attachment to that permit. It becomes a legal document for our compliance, and so our driver on that was more, we didn't know what the MPDS permit was really going to look like until this fall. We're beginning those conversations now. So we really didn't want to make that investment if we weren't sure we're going to head down that path. And I think it's something we've always talked about, but the cost was not something we really could predict 6 months or a year ago, because we really didn't. We have to be more specific about where we're putting it, how we're putting it. Do we want to do it in wider senses? So I asked myself, once I saw the $40,000 savings, I was asking myself, let's do it right now, because we're all starting to see a payback.
Of course.
But, you know, it's one of those things where the timing is now, and we're starting to look at it, and frankly, we've had a lot of other things in our mind too. And I wished we'd done it sooner, but here we are. But I think the driver in this cost is what we have to do to meet the regulatory requirements.
Okay. This is one of the many moments we've had over the last several years where I wish I could go back and ask, just to clarify, is this part of the, because when we get 900-page packets full of contracts and language, I don't know what I don't know, if that makes sense. So I can assume that something's included in that, which has been my assumption, only to find out that, oh no, that's actually a separate thing. So that's not your fault. I'm not sure it's mine for not picking that out of thousands of documents either, but it is, I'm at a bit of a conundrum because I don't want to not do this, but I'm kind of the same opinion as Councilmember Servadius. I'm a little befuddled at this point and just not really sure what I want to do. But this is another one of those we have to do this now or not situations, or
if we want to implement water reuse, we have to get it into the permit, and that requires a plan. We can reopen our permit in the future and add this in the future if we want it in the future.
But the infrastructure has to be in place to do so.
We have, like I say, we've had this always on our radar,
Right.
so we have the ability. Like, we put some spools in the wall to make sure we didn't have to be drilling through the wall in the future. So we always had planned to do it, but when the actual decision to pull the trigger has come up now, and it's driven more, like I say, by what we have to do to get our regulatory permit. So, yeah, we can not do it, move ahead, but it does require us to reopen our MPDS permit.
Gotcha. And would we have to reopen that anyway?
Right now, we are reopened because we're in the process. Our old permit is expired.
Okay.
And we're in the process of bringing our new plant online, so our new permit's going to reflect our new plant.
Okay, I wasn't sure what triggered the permit.
So-
And would this have been allowable under the old?
No, we'd have to reopen it. We couldn't, actually, with our old lagoon, no way. It had a 70/70 permit, and you take a glass of water, that looks like chocolate milk.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I have a question. We've told our public what our sewer plant's going to cost. So are these dollars going to be added to that total?
The
Or are they budgeted?
mechanical cost will be there. Some of that is new cost, but like the irrigation system, like some of the disinfection stuff's already in there. So some of it will be some new cost in there. It's within our contingency amounts.
It's within our contingency.
Like I say, it's within
So our contingency amounts are in that total figure that we've told our public.
Yes.
So it really isn't going to raise that figure.
Hope not, no.
Is it going to raise the rates?
That I can't answer.
I think there's a couple of things here. One, I'll answer your questions first. The price of this, there's enough of it in our contingency to cover the cost of this, so it's not an additional factor that'll raise rates and do that. There are two other pieces to this as well. I think I was down with City Council when we were at the lot plant down in Olympia, and one of their claims was they had kind of fake little stream there, and they said in the summertime the kids were out packing that stream, and that was all the reuse from that plant. So it makes me curious. I'd like to talk with you a little bit more about that and seeing what steps we could do to get a similar setup on that. And that we'll talk about that one and see. The other one is the cost of this. You know, when we were down in Olympia and looking at that, I think we've always known that was the direction we want to go and include that into the plan, and those have always been there. One of the things maybe we need to articulate a little bit better is that there are certain steps in the process here that we have to go through, even though we've had that in our conceptual thoughts and design about it. Now we're actually getting to some of those steps we have to go through to make that happen. Some of that will be working on our NPDES permit to get those things incorporated into that. And that is what some of this work is now, to actually get that stuff into fruition and make that happen. So it's not like it's been ignored until this point. It's just now we're reaching the right point where that work can be done based on what we know about the plant and the different pieces we're going to put out there. Some of the costs that Mr. Allenberg is talking about, going into Windjammer and doing the irrigation, some of the 300,000 there, that's not all new. Some of that is going to be a sunk cost anyway, because we would do that no matter whether that water was potable or whether it was reused from the plant. So we would have that cost there anyway. This isn't like an additional overlay cost on that. There might be a little bit just because we're splitting two systems. But we would have the same roughly lineal feet of pipe going out, just a different color. And there might be a little additional cost because we're connecting to a different source than the potable source. It would be connecting to the plant. Am I saying that correctly?
And
so
that's the irrigate type.
Right. So your payback analysis then, it may not necessarily include that the additional increase in cost from doing the potable part isn't going to be that full 300,000. The incremental cost from that is much smaller. And that's when we look at a payback, you have $40,000 a year in savings in water. We would probably get that payback within a few years on whatever the incremental cost of that purple line system is. So that's really the way to think about how that works from the money perspective on it. But we do need to get back to you and get some questions asked about the reuse of that water and how LOT does that or claims that they use it, and see if there's something we can do there as well.
And we have looked at reuse, recirculation system for the splash park, and the cost estimate we're getting on that was about $250,000 to $300,000 on top of the normal system. And so we felt that was, not as attractive as, so we're kind of adding cost on cost, and that's.
Councilor Campbell, do you have a question?
I just have a couple of things, well, off the shoulder things. In my book, if you don't have to spend $40,000 a year that you've been spending for 100 years, that's a savings. This is the only system I have ever heard of as a city council person where the city makes money. So I'm all for this for that reason. A couple other things, I don't know if you remember this, but 10 years ago when we were just talking about this, people say things like, well, I don't care what we do as long as it doesn't stink. Well, I think what we're going to do is replace the stink problem with this water problem. We'll have to prove to people that it is clean enough to use. But I think we ought to do this. Thank you.
Councilor Washington?
Yes, would it make sense and would it be possible to wait on acting on this until we get those answers about the streams and the splash parks and these other ways right there in the park that we possibly, it sounds like there's some unanswered questions, and if we approve this and something changes, we're just going to come right back to it, and are we going to have to are they going to have to give us quotes on hours spent on permits and meetings? It just, to me, it would make sense maybe to hold off on this until we get those answers, because certainly, we're talking, Rick asked about spending, the extra construction costs on top of this. It could be $200,000, $300,000. You mentioned the system to do the splash park being $250,000, but if that's going to save us even more per year on getting water from Anacortes, it might be worth it. I would like to know what exactly it would cost to use this water for our splash park and for our streams and any other water features that we have in the park. If we're able to, certainly before I approve this, knowing that this could be added to, changed, completely. If would that timeline work to wait to get some definite answers on other ways that we can use this water that we mentioned?
Yes, it would.
Thank you.
We are going into negotiations with DOE start next month, but, you know, it's still a ways out, so.
Councillor Munns.
Thank you, Mayor. Would this cause a time delay if we need, this is for Carollo to design something to fit in there, and if we wait another month and we don't vote on it till November, they're not working on this design, or are they? I mean, they need to have it approved, that they will get paid for working on this design that we're going to be presenting to DOE? You're saying that you have to have them design something smaller, particular. They've done the big design. They're doing, this is a small piece inside the plant.
Dr.
That's a
Merriman?
go.
I
So
think,
I'm trying to understand, I understand the cost, we want to know all the costs and how this purple water can be, we assumed it was being used a certain way, and tonight we find out, well, maybe not. It's like, okay. But I want to know time-wise, I want this, I thought this plan, originally, we had aimed for December 2017, December 31st for it to be running, and it's not going to be until 2018, November-ish, unless we can get things speeded up and we have good weather and all this other stuff. So is this a time delay in design that we have to wait if we don't approve this tonight?
Brett, I think we could put this to the next council meeting.
2 weeks, if we come back in the first meeting in October, I don't think it's going to be significant. After that, we start running into issues with getting facilities built inside the structure.
And Brett, I might add into that, I think what we would do in the meantime is see what we can find out about the permitting requirement on using the water for Splash Park. That would be item number one. And then maybe have a better way to explain or lay out what the cost of the additional irrigation and that is, so we can better quantify what that is. I hear that's what we're all interested in. So between now and I think it's October 3rd is that next council meeting, we can see what we can get together and bring it back to council and report to you on that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Servadius.
Thank you. I'm trying to recall if it was at a Parks Board meeting or have we seen it here in front of the council. There was a study, or they were looking at reclamation for the splash park. Did that come before us? Am I just forgetting? Or was it at a Parks Board level that I probably saw that?
I would have to check on that one for you, Mr.
Okay.
States.
So I would just be interested. I understand it would be expensive if we have to have the pool type filters and all that, but it would be interesting to see, do we spend, or do they anticipate us spending 10, 15 grand a year in the splash park, what the payback might be? I agree with Mr. Campbell. I do support this. If we can save 40,000, my concern is it's not just 78. It's a lot more than that. And how did we get there? That's a pretty big oversight. If you had said it's just for, it'd still be an outrageous number, but just for laying out the design of Windjammer, even though we've talked about it, I could maybe accept that. But when we talked about realigning stuff in the plant or adding chlorination or some of that,
That is a very small part of the cost. Most of the cost is preparing the reuse plan that we have to present to DOE.
okay. All right. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That permitting process, requesting permit from the Department of Ecology, will this include use of the effluent, the water for irrigation, splash park, and will that include using the water as potable water? Potable water like the city of Gilbert in Arizona was the first one in the states that have used the effluent as potable water because they were in the desert, they don't have any source of water coming from the mountain or salinization from the from the sea. So they use the water, effluent, as potable water.
Yeah, I think everybody gets that initial cringe factor when you think about water coming out of the treatment plant to be potable or drinkable water. I would probably want to look at each state's requirement, like we have Washington State Department of Ecology, to see what their regulations are for us that may be different than Gilbert. But I think your original question there is about the permit process, and do we need to do that permit for these questions? And of course, I'm going to bounce this one right back to Brett. Brett, I know you're pretty familiar with what
Yes.
things open the NPDES permit for us.
We can open NPS by any time by request. For us, it's just more convenient because we're negotiating the permit now. Putting this into the permit, our new permit, which is going out, is a lot simpler, and DOE is actually expecting it. And also, right now, Department of Ecology is going through an administrative rule change that makes use of this water a lot more efficient. Basically, it makes it a lot simpler to deal with. Before, they always did it on a case-by-case basis, and now it's being done by administrative rules, so the regulations and implementing is a lot simpler. But yeah, like I say, when I talk about the reuse water plan, we have to be very specific about how we're using it and where we're using it, and the reuse water plan would address those issues. So if we wanted to go outside and say wanted to irrigate some of their property, we'd have to bring that into the permit. Again, it's an administrative process. We don't have to reopen the permit to do that.
Yes, Councilor Campbell.
Do we need a motion to send this for next month, or do we just say we're done with it?
Councilmember Campbell, you could move to postpone it to the October 3rd meeting. It's October 3rd?
October 3rd? I make a motion, we postpone this until October 3rd.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Motion by Campbell, second by Munns to postpone this contract, or yes, contract number 8A until the October 3rd meeting. Any other input? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So we are now moving on to reports and discussion items. And I see our Development Services Director, Steve Powers. Item number 10A is Joint Planning Area Amendments.
Right, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Let me get my book open here. So before I get started this evening, a couple of introductory comments that actually will, I think, apply to both of these next two items. Probably the first comment is that while there is some relationship between these two items, they are in fact separate pieces. And I will remind the council as well as our community members that the concept of a joint planning area amendment has been discussed publicly longer than than this other item, the potential expansion of the urban growth area. So real takeaway is they are two separate items, although there is some relationship. The next comments also, I think, apply to both items, and these are really what our goals are for this evening from a staff perspective. The very first is just to introduce both of these topics to the council. The second is to describe to you or for you the steps which apply as we work our way through the consideration of these. Not to be used as barriers, but just so that you understand the actual procedures that we're required to follow. And the third one, which is of course incredibly important, is for you. We would recommend that you accept public comment this evening on these items, even though we are obviously not having public hearings at this stage. So with that out of the way, I think I've covered some of what the purpose for the JPA item is. We want to talk a little bit about the background from the countywide planning policies perspective. You're going to hear an awful lot about countywide planning policies for the next two items. And I'm going to apologize right up front. We're going to have a veritable boatload of acronyms here. We're going to have CWPP, UGA, JPA, PGA, AGA. There'll be a lot of acronyms, and I'll do my best to explain to you all of those. So we're going to talk a little bit about the countywide planning policies. We'll give you a little bit of a background on the joint planning area as a topic. Then sort of switch gears a bit and discuss how we developed a couple of options to share with the county staff. talk a little bit about that coordination with them, and then close the staff presentation by talking about the next steps. Then, of course, we'd be very interested in your questions and feedback, and then would recommend public comment as well. So the countywide planning policies, a lot of this I know is familiar to the council, but it may be new to our citizens. They are a policy agreement between Island County and the municipalities within Island County. So Island County, Oak Harbor, Coupeville, and Langley are all signatories on the countywide planning policy. So when we look at that language, it applies generally to all of those, to all of the urban areas in a similar fashion. There are obviously some distinctions, but I think it's important to just remember it's a policy agreement between us and the county. Those policies establish the framework for comprehensive plans. The requirement for this, for countywide planning policies, comes from state law. We're required to have it. It's a tool that helps make sure that our comprehensive plan is consistent with the county's comprehensive plan and vice versa. They cover a wide range of topics, as you've seen both here in July when you took action to approve some amendments, and then about a year previous to that when we adopted the latest version as we know it today. So again, covers a wide range of topics, including, and germane to this evening's conversation, how a joint planning area is established, how lands inside of that boundary are designated, and then how lands potentially transition from a joint planning area to be part of an urban growth area. And then just as a quick reminder, it was Resolution 1713 adopted on July 26th of this year, which approved amendments to those countywide planning policies. So joint planning area. First of all, just want to make sure everybody knows we actually have an existing joint planning area. It's been in existence for a very long time. I'll have some maps to show you here in a minute. That same resolution that approved the amendments to the countywide planning policy also did some things with respect to the joint planning area. One of those things was to ask the county to consider an expansion of the joint planning area. That was our second formal request. The first formal request from the council. A couple of months prior to that, there was a staff request via letter at the department head level. And then prior to that, we had been talking with them informally for probably the better part of a half a year about this idea. Second thing that happened with that resolution with respect to the joint planning areas is it set the general direction where the council was interested in seeing an expansion. You said generally to the south and to the southwest. You also requested, as the third bullet point, that the priority growth area designation be applied as is consistent with the countywide planning policy language. So after that went to the county, then we've received communication back for them, which says they asked us to provide them a map. And then we've done that, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last sort of general point for joint planning areas is that how land inside of a joint planning area is designated affects its ability to become part of an urban growth area. And that's the difference between the priority growth areas and the auxiliary growth areas, and we'll cover those in more detail. So I apologize for the draft stamp on this. This just happened to be the best version that we had of this, and this was something that we were using in 2016. But the key point with this, and I'm going to use the slide behind Dr. Merriman, is to show you the extent of the current JPA boundaries. So this area that is in the sort of pale yellow is the properties that's currently within the city limits. The shaded back purple are those properties which are currently inside of Oak Harbor's urban growth area but are not yet annexed into the city. And there goes the pointer. Imagine, if you will, that I was pointing to the heavy black line around the more colorful areas, and that's the boundary for the joint planning area, the existing joint planning area. It's come back. So here, now we've stitched ourselves to the southern end of our existing urban growth area. Now we're on the south end of town. This heavy black line is our urban growth area. The area in white is the city. This yellow happens to be the areas which are in the urban growth area but not yet annexed. This area that is in blue and or red are properties that are outside of our urban growth area. inside of our current JPA with the county. I apologize, Ms. Wassinger. And then the area to the south and to the west of this is not yet within any joint planning area. So this gives you the context of where we have been focusing our conversations and in the direction that the council gave that policy directive with the adoption of Resolution 1713. All right. I tried to think of a graphic example that would show how these pieces come together, and hopefully this makes some sense. So sort of nested pieces here. So we've got a joint planning area, and when we look at the countywide planning policies, and I gave you some citations in your agenda packet, there are some things some characteristics of the land that we should look for when we think about should it be included in the JPA or not. Should be adjacent to the existing urban growth area. It should generally be close to services, or at least be able to be provided services from urban services perspective. When I use that phrase, I'm talking about things like utilities, water, sewer, storm drain. Should be connected to either existing transportation corridors or future planned corridors. Here's something that we should try to avoid. We should try to avoid including lands of commercial significance, which is a phrase defined in the countywide planning policies, really means commercial agricultural properties. We should also try to draw logical boundaries. So by that we mean don't zigzag all over the place. Let's try to avoid creating islands or donut holes, so you don't want to exclude properties and then sort of go around and pick up some other properties, or try to make sure that it has some logic as we draw that boundary. So that's the overall concept of lands inside of a joint planning area. The next tier in that graphic then is the priority growth areas. Those are ones which are most likely to be included in an urban growth area. They may be lands which already have some urban character. By that, we're probably talking about maybe there's an existing development pattern in there where it's old county plats and the lots are relatively small. They may be very close to urban services, or in some weird circumstances, perhaps even have an urban service already in that area. And then the other sort of barometer, if you will, is that those lands that you would think about including in PGA is a logical and cost-effective expansion area. And again, these condensed terms are all found in your countywide planning policies. The next tier on this graphic then are those things which are the auxiliary growth areas. Think about those these are lands which are not going to be your first choice for including in an urban growth area, which is why I have that non-UGA phrase up there. So those are lands which are extensively constrained by critical areas. Those which have extensive, and I've shortened it, cultural benefits, environmental benefits, or social benefits that are rural in nature. Those aren't going to be in your top choices of lands to include in your UGA. And then by extension in your JPA. Again, commercially significant properties, as I referenced in the very first box. And then finally, you're going to try, any lands which would be affected by an APZ would be auxiliary growth areas. Again, not your first choice for including. So, seems like this slide is out of order, but we'll go ahead and go through it this way. So we developed two options to share with the county when we talked about providing them a map. And again, this line here is the southern boundary of our existing joint planning area. And so option A includes the greatest amount of land area, and I've got some statistics for you later on, and you can see that line, that other heavy blue line, running generally east and west and north and south in a logical pattern, and the southern boundary of that line goes all the way down to the Eby's Preserve line. The reason behind that is that there's specific policy in the countywide planning policies that says that for joint planning areas, city and the county should take into consideration those lands which are special and really focus on how the land uses adjacent to those special lands will be treated. So it's not to say that you're going to push the urban growth all the way to that particular area. Perhaps quite the contrary. What you're really saying is this area deserves both jurisdictions really looking at it to see what are the appropriate land use mix in order to preserve something which is unique. This boundary, which is known as option B, is smaller in scale, shares some of those same attributes in terms of it's coincident with the boundary of Eby's Preserve, but it does not extend as far to the west as option A. So how did we come up with those two maps? First of all, the two options, again, option A was the larger one that I showed you. It's roughly 2,100 acres in size. Option B is roughly 960 acres in size. That's just to give you a sense of scale. We established those boundaries. We believe they are consistent with Resolution 1713. In other words, the Council's policy directive on the general direction where you wanted to see a JPA grow. Both of those are to the south of the existing joint planning area. Both are consistent with various aspects of the countywide planning policies. So again, use sensitive lands as a boundary. I've explained that a little bit in terms of the uniqueness, and we want to make sure that wise choices are made in those areas. Secondly, straight boundary lines wherever possible. Third, try to avoid those donut hole situations. And then finally, proximity to existing services. And I think that's true for some portions of both of those areas. The eastern boundary of both option B and option A is immediately at the, this is going to make me crazy because it comes and it goes. Again, this is the boundary of our existing urban growth area here, and our urban services extend into the area where we have the city limits. So this potential expansion of the joint planning area is close to where those urban services already exist. And that's true, again, both for option A and for option B. And that's one of the criteria that we find in the countywide planning policies. So that's how do we set the boundaries? Okay, where are we going to draw that line? What's going to be inside? What's going to be outside? The next piece of this then is the designations. How might you go about designating the lands inside of that joint planning area? Well, I've mentioned the concept of priority growth area. I've mentioned the concept of auxiliary growth area. I also want to point out that countywide planning policies say that we don't have to designate all lands. So if it's too early to tell on something, or it's not really clear which way it might best be, or maybe it shouldn't be either one of those, there's nothing in the policies which prevent us from just leaving it blank. So that's an option as well. So these designations are determined by the countywide planning policies. The simplest part in terms of figuring out where we're going to do things is lands which can be designated as PGA should be designated as such. That's consistent with your policy suggestion to the county. And so we would go through and apply that. Not all lands can be designated as priority growth area. That's that auxiliary concept. And as you looked at those policies in your document, you could see that there are, and as I've explained, there are some lands which are going to fall into the auxiliary category. And then there are some options within the countywide planning policies. One of those options is that if something is designated as auxiliary growth area, it's not forever cast in that particular light. It's possible to redesignate that as priority growth area if certain criteria are met. And so it's staff's thought that there are some options within the countywide planning policies that could be explored in terms of how we might work with the county to designate those properties. I'm going to shift gears and talk just briefly about our coordination with Island County so far. First and foremost, I wanted to make sure the council's aware that we've been in a lot of communication with the county for a good number of months on the JPA topic. So there's been informal communication and there's been slightly more formal communication. The schedule that we're working on and trying to help with this particular topic, we built to work around the county's schedule. So we believe that we're meeting their needs. And just so that you know, and probably more for the audience, that we did provide the county two maps, option A and option B, and a comment letter on September 11th. and that, per their own written materials, that'll be part of their process that they share with their planning commission and with their county commissioners. So coordination with Island County has been happening and it will be ongoing. I talked about schedule. We have sort of a colorful schedule here for you, but that is, as you might imagine, on purpose. The shaded blue areas or grayish areas reflect touch points with the council, either ones that we know for sure or ones which may possibly take place depending on how things progress through this process. So obviously tonight we're on September 19th, where this is our first formal briefing for the council on the JPA concept. Just by frame of reference, the green rows in this table reflect where certain county things are taking place. So next Monday, the Island County Planning Commission is meeting. We expect that at some level, part of the conversation will be on the concept of joint planning areas. Our next point in terms of public briefing will be with the Planning Commission a week from tonight. So we'll be briefing the Oak Harbor Planning Commission on this same conversation we're having with you this evening. And I won't go ahead and read you all of this, but then you will see that we do have this on your workshop again for next week. And so it was kind of our thought that we'd lay this out for you tonight, sort of introduce you to the topic, try to help with whatever questions you had initially, come back a week from Wednesday with the full expectation that you would have a whole list of other questions for us, and we'd do our best to help you with those at that time. So what is our recommendation this evening? I think I alluded to it earlier. First of all, this is a discussion item only, so no action is asked for. We would love your feedback and questions, and we would suggest that you take comment from any members of the public who would like to comment. And I think that concludes the staff presentation at this time, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. I think keeping with our normal way of doing business, we will now at this time ask for any public comment about the joint planning area amendments as presented, asking you to please limit your comments to 3 minutes, state your name clearly into the microphone. So it's open to anybody that's got any input or questions at this time. Okay, seeing none, let's bring it to the council, and obviously this is a discussion item only, no action expected, but looking for any kind of input or additional questions you might have. Councilor Wassinger.
Thank you. Mr. Powers, so we have submitted our maps and you put your timeline up of the county's next meetings. Are they required to respond in a formal way to our map options? What are their legal obligations to change this JPA and adopt these maps if they want to? If they not, what now can we expect as council after submitting our resolution and maps that the county will or will not do?
So first point of information to respond to that is that they have on their current work program and their docket for 2017 looking at potential amendments to the joint planning area. So they have it as an item that they are potentially going to be taking action on. And that's just important because that makes sure procedurally they could do that. There is no requirement for them to work with us to amend the JPA. They don't have to approve a particular thing. On the other hand, they've been very clear informally with staff that this is a collaborative process, and really the joint planning area is, I think they view it more as a tool for us than it is necessarily something for them. And so I certainly won't predict what happens, but I would have every expectation that they will take our recommendations and eventually the council's formal recommendation seriously. For them, what I think they're going to be doing is they're going to talk to their planning commission about it. They're also going to talk to the county commissioners about it, which is why so far we haven't slated this for formal action for you yet, because county staff's recommendation to us is that it doesn't make sense for you to take action on a particular boundary until we know in essence that will be acceptable to the county commissioners. Once we've got that kind of figured out, then they will likely take action first, and then you will follow up with your action, just like we did with the countywide planning policies. But there'll be that back and forth between staffs to make sure that we're, to use an often used phrase, both on the same page.
Okay, one more question. If you could very in layman's terms for me,
Whoops.
explain what, once you designate a land in the county, that would be currently in the county, as part of a new boundary for the JPA, what powers does that, how does that change that piece of land?
That's an excellent question, and I probably should have tried to address that somehow in the presentation. It doesn't change anything. It does not mean that that property is going to be annexed by the city. It certainly doesn't mean that it's subject to our rules and regulations. What it means is that this is an area that the city and the county have agreed that we're going to look at together. And I think it's really important to note that that doesn't necessarily mean that any area will become urban. There can be other topics of mutual interest between the city and the county that would benefit by looking at those in the concept of a joint planning area. Transportation comes to mind. Open space corridors come to mind. Maybe dealing with some unique wildlife characteristics for some other reason. So there are lots of things which we could potentially look at. So if something is now inside of a JPA, it doesn't change that property's zoning. It doesn't change its status from the county's perspective. So if it has this zoning or this particular classification of use, like agriculture, or it's in a forest type of zone, none of that changes.
Thank you.
Councilor Heisen.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Powers, could you touch on the, well, let me back up. It's my understanding that the county, with partnership with the city, has already completed their buildable land analysis that was signed off on less than a year ago. Can you explain what role, if any, the BLA has in considering the JPA, or if that would be better left for our next agenda topic?
It's actually more suited to the next agenda topic, yeah.
Okay.
But I love the
I
use of the
suspect that is
acronyms.
I'm all about the BLA and the JPA
Yeah,
and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our last agenda item 10B, Wright's Crossing Urban Growth Area Expansion.
Right. Whoops. So the same sort of prelude to this. Our goal this evening as staff is to introduce the application to you, not in any great depth, talk about process, and I think I've got some more process slides in here that should hopefully be helpful. And then thirdly, suggest that you take public comment should folks want to speak to the topic. So I've just covered that, plus we'll also talk about the next steps. So by way of background, the Wright's Crossing application was submitted to Island County on August 1st. Simply put, it seeks to expand Oak Harbor's urban growth area by approximately 248 acres. I think that what the materials tell us that up to 1,500 homes would be proposed within that area. We're just noting for you that there's some additional acreage that would be is part of what the county is going to be looking at in order to connect the area that's under application by Wright's Crossing to the actual existing urban growth area of the city. Okay. Also, by way of background, we provided preliminary formal comments on August 28th. The reason why we did that is that the county's application process actually requires the submittal of comments from the city. There's a lot of detail that goes around that. I'd be happy to explain that more, but suffice to say that they need comments from us. We provided formal comments to them on the 28th, and we provided copies for you both of the application as well as our comments in your packet. So this first map is the applicant's map that they generated to demonstrate the positioning of the land that they have under application relative to existing transportation corridor, which is obviously Highway 20, and then the existing urban growth area of the city. So again, behind Dr. Merriman, we've got SR 20 here. This is Monroe Landing at this location. This is Miller Road here. This yellow is, again, property that is currently within the city limits. This pinkish pale color is land which is inside of our existing urban growth area. The area in purple is the area that the applicant has placed under application. This area here, this kind of orangish color, and on here it says, I think that says unrepresented land. That's the land which is necessary to sort of bridge that gap between where Wright's Crossing is at to where the southern boundary of our urban growth area is at. There can't be that gap. Just like annexation, you know that we have to, when we annex things, we have to be contiguous. The same is going to be true for the urban growth area, any particular expansion of any kind. So the following maps are two maps that the county has produced as part of their information. They show you essentially the same thing, but with slightly different levels of detail. On here you can see that, again, the Wright's Crossing is in the parcels which are largely unencumbered by property divisions, and then immediately to the north and slightly northeast you see the smaller parcels. That's that intervening land bridge that I was referring to earlier. This next map, I don't expect, obviously, the council to be able to read that, but the point of that is that there are various zoning districts in the county, as you might expect. That underlying zoning and how certain other land classifications apply to those lands have bearing on the Wright's Crossing application as to whether those lands could be designated as priority growth area should they end up in the JPA, or would they end up being designated as auxiliary growth area. And so the real takeaway point for you is that county zoning has an impact, as you might expect, on whether the land can be designated as PGA or not. So some just quick bullet points on the process, and I fully expect that we'll spend more time next week at your workshop on process. I didn't want to try to overload it too much this evening. So as you probably guess, Island County is the lead when we're talking about the expansions of urban growth areas, or even just setting the original boundary. State law tells us the county is in charge of that. We know that ourselves. The city has a role, though, as well, as you might expect. It involves multiple steps, and also, as you might expect, we've got a body of regulations which help figure out what are the rules that we're using. The Growth Management Act, that's that 3670A reference. That WAC which is referenced are those administrative codes which help us understand what the law means. And then we've talked about the countywide planning policies have effect as well. So for this, I'd like to distribute to the council, because this is a fairly important couple of flow charts. And really, we put it on here in nice big letters. Want to acknowledge the county as our planning partners have developed some great handouts for use in explaining their comprehensive plan process, and all good planners will steal from other jurisdictions rather than recreate something yourself. And so we've taken full advantage of the flow chart that they have that tells us about the process. I'm going to actually steal one of those back. And some of this is not relevant to our conversation, but I don't think it'll take terribly long to go through, and so it's probably worthwhile just for general background. So like any application process, your first step is to figure out, is the application complete? Yes, no. Well, if it's no, and you can see, and for the benefit of our audience, the yes boxes generally tend to be running down the page and the no's are running out to your right-hand side. Is the application complete? This is work that the county is doing now. Yes or no. If no, you get the additional information. Once you get to yes, then they have to figure out, is docketing required, yes or no. Then There's some procedural things in here. They need to take their docket items to their planning commission, to their board. We're aware of those steps. Those bodies are going to review the proposed docket items, and by the end of November, under the county's code, the board will have made their decision as to whether to docket any particular item, not just this one, but any particular comprehensive plan proposal. The board will make their decision by the end of November. And they have three choices. They are to include it as part of the docket. It is to defer it, which in essence means the application may be considered, but it may not happen in that particular docket. It's likely to happen in the next particular docket cycle. Or they could choose to exclude an application. Again, these rules don't apply just to this particular one. This applies to any potential comprehensive plan topic coming before the county. So we're going to focus then this evening on the bottom portion of that sheet, which is there's a docket that gets adopted. And then the review process begins for those docketed proposals. So let's go to the next page if we could, please, Council. And then for this type of application, which is something to consider, again, possible expansion of an urban growth area, could be ours, could be Langley's, is you have to, is reevaluation of the thresholds or the proposal against those thresholds appropriate? So we look at our countywide planning policies and say to ourselves, do one of those criteria apply? So what you might remember is that the countywide planning policies say to us, this is a significant undertaking. You shouldn't do this every year. We are going to definitely look at the question of urban growth area boundaries and buildable lands analysis every time we have to do an update to the plan, which is once every 8 years, right? That's the mandate to do that. But we recognize that that can be a long time. That might not make a lot of sense. And so we built into the countywide planning policies some triggers, if you will, or thresholds. If a certain thing is met, then it warrants looking at that analysis again. It's mostly focused on employment or on residential growth. There are some other factors in there, but those are the two things. And so what an applicant has to demonstrate, thank you. My life is complete. What an applicant has to demonstrate is that one of those thresholds, one or more of those thresholds has been met. So on our flow chart here is if the answer is yes, then that's going to take us down to the next step, which is did they get included on the docket? If the answer is no in terms of that threshold, that thing is going to be excluded from the docket. The green box here matches up with the green box on the previous page, which is yes, it's included on the docket. That takes us to the next step. Okay, now we've said there are sufficient changes in local circumstances that says, hey, wait a minute, guys, we should look at this again. So now what are we going to look at? Well, what you're looking at is that buildable lands analysis. Again, that's that capacity. Do we have the capacity inside our urban growth area to handle the 20-year population projection? Please remember that when we're talking about this, we're talking about the 20-year horizon. Do we have enough land in there to meet that population projection? That's what step 2, Council, on your handout, and for the members of our audience, step 2 is right here, which is telling us to look at that buildable lands analysis. So going to the green box underneath, we're going to reevaluate, or the county's going to reevaluate the countywide population projections and allocations. Key phrase there, countywide population projections and allocations. So the impact may be generally focused in one particular portion of the county, but they're going to look at the entire county. Now, the flip side of that coin, of course, is that it's pretty reasonable to assume that if the impact which is being created is localized in one portion of the county, while they may still have to assign some small portions of that growth elsewhere, the majority of it would likely be assigned to the area where that impact is being created. Next step is there capacity for projected growth within the existing boundaries? So we've reevaluated the capacity. If the answer to that question is yes, then we're not allowed to expand the urban growth area. If the answer to the question is no, then we're still not to the stage where we can say expansion is the choice. Under the Growth Management Act, we're first required to look at what's termed alternative measures. So what does that mean? What that really is looking at the densities. Is it possible for us to change densities for certain zoning districts, thereby increasing the number of units could be built inside of the existing urban growth area? And is that a possible way for us to increase that capacity? Can we redesignate lands? In some jurisdictions, you may have too much of one category, and you could say, well, let's take away some of this commercial that we are never going to need, and let's change that to residential, and then you could increase your capacity that way, and you don't have to expand your urban growth area boundaries. Again, one of the basic tenets of GMA is we're going to try to keep that growth inside of the UGA. But it also recognizes, it meaning the Growth Management Act, that those may not work, or that maybe you can do that and you get some incremental change, but you're not going to meet your needs solely by upzoning or changing land use categories or a combination of those. And that's when we get to seriously take a look at the concept of potentially expanding the urban growth area. And that's really what the bottom of this handout says to you. You can see in here there's a citation that tells us, have alternatives been considered per this WAC and the countywide planning policy. And so that's the process that I've just described to you. So the WAC tells us we have to do it. Countywide planning policy says city and the county have agreed we're going to undertake that. We will undertake that alternatives measure analysis. And then we're going to talk to the county about our results. And that it's reasonable for us to make our case for as to why we think those measures would be successful or not successful. The county has an obligation to listen to that input from us. And then finally, the last little green box on the bottom side there, right side, is if we figured out that the alternative measures won't work, then we can talk about the idea of expanding a UGA or the UGA. So just another really simple graphic that picks up with where that one left off. So if we're going to talk about a UGA expansion, then the question is what size should it be? And as you saw in the countywide planning policies, it's not necessarily the size which may be proposed by a particular applicant, and where's the right location. Again, may not be where it's proposed. It could be where it's proposed. The concept being that you go through all of these steps, you figure out that you need the capacity, then what's the most logical place to provide that capacity? It might be where that person has filed that application. It might not be. You go through a rational process and try to answer those questions. So the county's application process required the city to comment on 5 main areas. I've put those for you on the screen. One is consistency with the comprehensive plan. I've just annotated a little bit under there for you. You saw in our letter we commented on, particularly within our urban growth area chapter of the comprehensive plan, as well as the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan. We tried to give the county some sense of the goals and policies that we thought would be applicable as we might do further review. Second area that we had to comment on is whether or not we've done those alternative measures. Well, obviously we haven't done those to date because it's not something that you really undertake until you get to a certain point in the process. County's accepting of that answer, and that's the answer that we put in our letter for them. Number 3, comment on the potential location of the UGA boundary revisions. We provided some comment there in terms of its relative proximity to existing services in the southern boundary of our existing UGA. The feasibility of providing those urban services and impacts to the capital improvement plan and the transportation improvement plan. We provided some comment to them on that. And then finally, how might we go about engaging the public as you work on forwarding your thoughts to the county formally. They were requiring us to demonstrate that we heard from the public as well. And so we gave them a tentative schedule in our comment letter. And it looked an awful lot like the one that I showed you on the previous item, but we've added steps to that schedule now that weren't in that when we sent the letter on August 28th. This has been pretty fast moving, so from the 28th to now, our schedule has changed by adding more steps. What are those next steps? Again, as a reminder, we're in communication with county staff. Our schedule was built around theirs. The next 2 key dates are just like the ones for the JPA. We're talking to the Planning Commission next Tuesday. We're back with you folks on Wednesday. And I think we put that same slide in here as well. I won't go over that again. And our recommendation for you on this one is the same as it was on the last one. No action tonight. Please give us your feedback or your questions, and then be a good idea to hear from the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. So this would be the time for public input about this item, Wright's Crossing Urban Growth Area Expansion. For the public, anybody wishing to speak, please limit your, yes, please come to the podium. Please state your name and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Mayor, real quick, point of order.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could I jump in, because I know people are going to want to comment? Can we just go ahead and extend, I move to suspend our rules and extend the meeting time to 10 o'clock?
Okay, motion.
Well, in 15 minutes, the meeting ends.
Okay. Okay.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to expend our rules and open, or have our meeting run until 10 o'clock. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Yes, sir. Come ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is William Stell. I live on Penn Cove, right down the hill from this proposed annexation site. And I'm here respectfully to voice my strong opposition to the proposition that we would annex this site into the UGA of the city. I appreciate the opportunity to participate today, and I would also commend the planning director for really a very good, clear, balanced description of the process. It can be very difficult. A couple of observations. First of all, is the modifications, well, this process itself is hugely difficult and controversial at a county-wide scale, and you know that very well. Pulling this trigger is not a light thing to do by any means, either by yourselves, as you well understand, or by the county. The county just completed a buildable lands analysis in December of last year. It is fresh, and it has concluded that the city of Oak Harbor has sufficient capacity to meet projected population growth over the next 20 years, including Navy expansion. So the very threshold for commencing this entire process is not met. And therefore, trying to leapfrog this process and jump to a UGA annexation is deeply premature. It will be highly divisive. It will be a huge distraction. And it will take years, and it will ultimately fail. So I would tonight, out of great respect, request that you keep an open mind as we work through what the alternative strategies might be to meet housing, to meet the crushing transportation challenges that you know much better than I, and the provision of other urban services, and also to importantly protect that irreplaceable agricultural heritage that is our neighborhood. This is active farmland, and you don't get to pave active farmland and bring it back again. And if that farm disappears into some sort of housing development, it will collapse the adjoining farms. And we need to take care to maintain a sufficient agricultural base to have the agricultural infrastructure to continue with it here as part of our future. So I appreciate very much the opportunity to participate tonight, and I look forward to working with you and Island County Commissioners as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I like the stop clock up there, that's great.
Dave Jasmine, 2401 Northeast Goldie Street, Oak Harbor. Again, thanks, council, for letting us speak. This is nothing to do with being for or against this annexationist proposal, but property owners' rights do change after annexation. On 2401 Goldie Street, we annexed recently into city limits with the help of Mr. Powers and his staff. They tried many times before. Finally, the time came right when they were successful, and we believed it was right to do so. Since then, we have found our rights have changed. Our property originally was zoned residential. Just has older mobile home on it and a rental. We actually have 3 parcels. I'm just discussing the one. And it was zoned residential. It was a legal conforming land use. Now, the zoning changed to PIP with this annexation, Planned Industrial Park. Planned industrial parks have been slow to grow in the area for obvious reasons, mostly infrastructure. So now we have a legal, non-conforming land use. One, it makes your property harder to sell. Banks don't like to finance on unsure things. 2, you cannot, now that it is zoned as PIP, any future redevelopment has to be towards the new zoning. So therefore, the structures on the property are actually useless when their life comes up. That's going to make them more expensive to redevelop than a property that was developed not necessarily the same way. Recently, we got a big tax property increase from Island County. They decided, since the property is not got a good return on its dollars in the condition that it's in, they decided to use a new rule, or not a new rule, but a new rule they're going to apply to us, and tax it based on best use, which would be the commercial use, even though we're not using it as a commercial, it is residential. They jacked our property taxes up probably to twice what they're worth on the land. They compared us to a $1.8 million mini storage down the street and would-be tax shuttle. It is just an old mobile home. That's all it is. And it is not would-be it's not Oak Harbor mini storage or anything like that. This is what's going to happen to other property owners if they get annexed into the city limits. That if their property zoning changes to PIP, like a commercial district out there, or something else for housing, they might lose their property rights too. They might not be able to build a barn because their property might be PIP. They might not be able to do anything with their properties the same. This needs to be concerned. Thanks for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Jasmine. Anyone else?
Council, yeah. Jake Sandifer, Oak Harbor resident. I do want to bring to everyone's attention what was said before when the public had a chance to speak. We had 3 people come up here that we need houses. We currently don't have any houses available to the people that need them. And those 2 facts are causing us to lose out on people that could potentially be living here and helping us to boost our local economy. We boost our economy, we can build a lot more water parks out on City Beach. So I'm all for this. I think it's going to be a great opportunity, and I would really hate for us to all think that this is something that comes along all the time. You know, it's kind of an opportunity that you have to grab and take and not throw that away. Thank you.
Hello again. Lanny Nienhaus, citizen of Oak Harbor. I'm a native of this town. I'm a native of this county. Lived here 75 years. We have lots of farms when I was a little kid. This whole community was farms. Farms all the way down to South Woodby, out in areas that are still not developed, but the farms are gone. I have had this property on the market for sale. I represent my family who owns this farm. They want to sell that farm. They have owned it for some many, many years, and all they're asking is to someone buy it, and it is for sale. Certainly anybody can buy that property, but this is the highest and best use because the farms are gone, whether we develop or not. They cannot make a living on Whidbey Island. Thank you.
Kathy Phillips, 1192 Channeling. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I encourage you again to be proactive on this situation. We need your help. We really have a housing crisis. One thing I want to point out to you, I have the list of affordable housing task force meetings that have been going on since November of last year. I believe that ended in June, and I know that there was some switching of the topics that was on here, but it's very obvious that we have a problem, and you folks with Island County have had these meetings and had these task forces, so I know that you know that it's very important to all of us to have this. Again, we have folks who are traveling off island up to 2 hours each direction, and I would really hope that you would be, again, proactive in this and work with the county, but it's immediate. It is not something where docketing can happen next year or the year after. We have to do it now. This has been going on for some time, that we have not had the housing available, and without your help, it's not going to happen. So please, please move this forward if you can for us. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, thank you. I'm Rick Schutte. I'm the owner of Coochie Real Estate and Coochie Property Management here in town. Just to clarify it, I am not Dutch, and I'm not one of the good old boys, whatever that is. So just want to let everybody know that. I came here in the Navy 42 years ago this month, and I'm still here. I love the Lord, I love my family, and I love this community. I now have a grandson, and I'm about to have a granddaughter, and I want them to be able to stand here, stay here in the area. The housing, as we've seen over all the years, has so much impact on our economy. I had a chance at the beginning of the year to speak to the Chamber of Commerce. And at that time, when I gave them a little encouragement message, I said, you know, if we can see something, if we can believe that it can happen, we can achieve it. And I heard a big amen from our mayor's table and all those that are around, that we can achieve anything that we set our minds to do. I really believe that the opportunity to build for the long term, for the generations to come, for our future for Oak Harbor is here today. I believe that with the presentation of Wright's Crossing, incorporation into the UGA, all of those things can be accomplished now if we don't keep pushing them out, pushing them out, pushing them out. In my lifetime, I'll never see it happen. I believe so much in this town. My family and I invested in building down on Pioneer Way this year. I'm in debt until I die. The only way it's going to pay off is with my insurance, I think. But I'm excited about what's happening in Oak Harbor, and I believe that we can really see growth in this town. I have to disagree with Mr. Powers that we can just, I believe that we have to take action tonight. I'm going to ask the council if you'll consider a resolution, something to the county to say the city of Oak Harbor is behind this. Some type of UGA growth, some type of UGA enhancement, that we not defer this thing, that we don't say, county, defer it until next year. Let's get it on the docket. Let's make a decision. Let's increase what we have here. You know, I can see it. I can see more people living on the island. I can see the economy of Oak Harbor growing. I can see the costs of our utility plant going down and down and down because we have more connections because of our housing. I can see the income coming into our cities. I can see our businesses growing. I can see these things. I believe it can happen, as I know you do, and I know it can be done. So let's get it done. Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you, Council. And I'm sorry if I sounded like I was preaching, but I'm very passionate about this.
Pass the offering plate.
Other comments? Okay, seeing none, come back up to the council, see what council, I guess there is no action planned, but, yes.
Mayor, I have a question, if it would be appropriate, please indulge me. We have a number of realtors here. If people can afford to buy homes off the island and then drive on and off the island every day, how come they can't afford to buy homes here, and why don't we have builders building in the available properties that we have? It's a big expense to drive on and off the island. Cost of housing is approximately the same in Anacortes, Mount Vernon, and the south end of the island. So what are we doing here that's preventing builders from not meeting that demand?
Well, I don't know that we're going to take that on tonight.
Okay.
But,
it's worth a thought.
We certainly do have some meetings coming forward.
I'm curious about
could and should be discussed.
A good discussion about that topic.
Sure. Good question. Councilor Heisen.
On that same note, Councilmember Ellenberg has a point. The buildable land analysis was just done. It included the current population, employment. It included the growth from the Navy. All of that very recent information was considered, and it was just done. And that accounted for a 20-year projection. So if the county and the city just looked at all of this same data and said, okay, we're good, we can accommodate growth and development for the next 20 years, theoretically, this isn't the only parcel out there that can be built. I don't think I share an office with the housing task force, the Housing Assistance Center at Island County. I promise no one is more cognizant of the housing issue. I promise. I see 40 people come in every day. And this is not about saving agricultural land. This is about, we have developable land. It could be developed by a developer that wanted to do so. Just because someone wants to develop housing doesn't necessarily mean they can just pick a parcel that happens to not be in the UGA or the city limits or might be halfway there and have us either bypass a legal process or hopscotch utilities out there. When I hear someone wants to come to a carbon build 250 affordable houses, I'm amending all over the place, just like you, Mr. Shuley, I promise. But that's not the issue. The issue is, can this particular piece of property be used for that, and should it? That's really the only question on the table. And is that legally allowable? Which, when you go through all of these RCWs and county and city policies, is debatable. I think either, if this happened and it had to be defended in court, I think either side would probably have a case. But it's just, I don't know. I think we're putting the cart before the horse, and I think we're kind of missing the big picture, which is how do we develop what we already have versus accommodate a specific project that wants to happen outside all of those boundaries and processes. And because this would, if they have to redo the buildable lands analysis, they have to base their comp plan on that. They have to base their transportation plan on that. The city then also has to do that. And that would be a cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars to redo all of those processes, not to include issues impact mitigation issues like traffic, like our fire department being able to respond in a reasonable amount of time. Essential services that we'd be under obligation to provide that I'm not sure it'd be physically possible for us to provide in that particular location. So I have concerns. Believe me, I wish we had more developers and people applying for building permits and being willing to satisfy that need. I think it's legally complicated in a way that even I don't really fully understand. So it certainly warrants more discussion. I think you did a really good job with the flow chart of the steps. It's not a matter of wanting it or not wanting it. It's can it physically and legally be done? That's my understanding, at least. I don't think anybody doesn't want housing. Is that fair?
It is a procedural.
Right.
I was going to say a procedural process, but that would be incredibly redundant. There are a number of steps that you go through sequentially.
Right.
And you either successfully complete a step or not, I think is the way to look at it. Again, not as a barrier, but as the rules of which we have to apply.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fits the criteria or it doesn't before you can.
And again, that's why, as part of my presentation, talked about, when we automatically do BLA review versus when there's a triggering event, because that's very important to include. It makes absolutely no sense to say we're only going to do it once every 8 years, because there could be a change of circumstances. And there could be a change of circumstances within a 12-month period of time. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 5 years away. So, the applicant is in their application has made their case to say why they think there is a change of circumstances which warrants a reexamination of the buildable lands analysis under the appropriate policy. Mm-hmm. That's their absolute right to do that. County has looked at that information. They've provided some information back to their planning commission, and they are working their way through evaluating that application against those appropriate policies.
Mm-hmm. The state law says that the BLA only be done every 8 years when the, it's another plan, what is it?
Well, we do the comprehensive plan every 8 years.
No, I have it written down. I blanked out. But the county, I think, from what I understand, specifically took that word should and built in flexibility so that it can be revisited.
Well, frankly, we requested it
right. Well,
because
us.
It didn't make sense to lock ourselves into only a particular cycle.
Right.
And somewhat as a footnote to this, and I don't want to dwell on this concept,
Sure.
but a lot of the work that we did on the countywide planning policies, you heard us talk about a year ago. The reason we went to such great lengths to try to figure out how does the process work is because in 2005 and in 2006, we didn't have that clearly identified process. Mm-hmm. And the city and the county found themselves at odds with each other over the topic of expanding our urban growth area. And both agencies said, we don't want to do that again. We want to make sure that we really clearly understand how we're going to go about this. How are we going to have the conversation? Let's put those procedures in place. And that's why we said to them, we don't think it's right to lock us just onto an 8-year cycle. And to their credit, they agreed. They said, you're right, change in circumstances. Let's figure out what those thresholds could be. Let's put them in our policies.
A periodic update.
Yes, periodic update, which is the 8-year cycle. Used to be 5, then it was 10, then they settled on 8.
I think, for the record, this might be slightly off topic, but I think it's fantastic that I think the relationship between county and island planning and city planning has improved a lot. And so the fact that there's now some discretion and some flexibility built into that process is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Not just necessarily for this project, but moving forward, it only makes sense to do it that way.
Staff agrees.
Well, good. I'm glad staff agrees. It's just, there are a lot of steps, and as of this moment, we are not necessarily one of them unless it's in terms of communicating with the county.
We have a
There's
couple.
nothing we can physically do or take action on, like you said.
Not this evening.
Right.
But we do have, under the county's comprehensive plan process, there are some parts of that which belong to the city as well. So I commented on the comments.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've met that particular obligation from their process perspective. The other piece, which you heard the word resolution earlier this evening, and the county does require a resolution from the council. I believe that when you look at the actual policy language in the countywide planning policies, says that the county won't approve a privately initiated urban growth area expansion application without the legislative body from that jurisdiction signaling their support of it. What the county has required as part of their process this year is that resolution be provided by the city council to the county commissioners in advance of them making the decision to put it onto the docket. And so part of what we have into this schedule for you, and we didn't put all of the steps on here. This is actually a much more complicated schedule. So we've got dates, we've got the legislative body, and out here on the right-hand side, we have the things that we're going to be doing at each of those meetings. And so the earliest possible date that the county commissioners would be taking up the topic as to whether or not to, on their docket, this item or any other, would be October 18th. And so the schedule that we've laid out here for you would present the council a resolution that would meet the county's requirements in terms of what they're asking to have in that resolution prior to that date. We can meet that date or any of the, so it could be the 17th, it could potentially be on the 3rd, it could even be earlier than that if the council so directed. So we do have an action that's ahead of us, or the council has to consider an action ahead of us within the next month's period of time.
That makes sense.
Okay. Other? Yes, Councilor Sebelius.
Thank you, Mayor. I've been following this housing issue fairly closely for the last probably 6+ months, and I put an untold amount of hours into talking to builders, talking to planners, or Mr. Powers. It's been good. I've appreciated the education. Just trying to understand the situation better and figure out solutions. You know, I'm from a farm. My family still has 80 acres in southern Idaho, and so I appreciated Mr. Nienhaus's comment that, you know, if the family wants to sell, and I get emails from folks both pro and con, or recently I have, both pro and con on this issue, and I guess I'll preface all these comments with some of the comments I used at that informational meeting that Wright's Crossing put on, and that is to try and get as much information as possible and try and understand both sides. Why would someone want this? Why would someone not want this? What are the consequences? What are the pros? Utilities? What are the cons? I don't have as much open space around me, or I don't have that view corridor, whatever it is. Try to understand both sides. But, you know, I've watched my own family. We now rent that land out. It basically pays the property tax, and that's it. It's not a profitable farm. It's an agricultural farm, 80 acres. And I've watched so much of that southern Idaho surrounding community do that. It's getting gobbled up by the bigger commercial farmers, and that's unfortunate. But that's part of the reality of the world in which we're in. Mr. Stell, I very much appreciate your comments. They're lucid, they're thoughtful, they're non-emotional, they're well-spoken, and I think that's the dialogue that we need. And I said also at that Wright's Crossing meeting that I support this in its infancy. And I do, and by that I mean I want to see, there's a lot of public comment that will come forward if this goes onto the docket. And even before it gets on the docket, there's a lot of chance for the public to weigh in. As I've studied this, one of the questions that it's a very simple question, but it's a very complex answer. Why aren't they building here? And when I went out and I started asking this question, but I didn't ask the right question. I was asking, how can we make it better, assuming maybe the city did something wrong? And what I'm starting to learn is there are some answers, but a lot of it is pure economics. The question I'm about to go back out on the street and start asking a lot of these builders, because as I've learned, a lot of them are building, but they're building in the county. So why are they building in the county? Well, there's some real superficial things I'm hearing, and this is just so you know what I've been working on, economics. It's more affordable. I don't have the regulation, right? We're an NPDES Phase 2 permit, LID requirements, low impact development. They can go buy a 5-acre parcel, develop it, turn it, make 30, 40 grand, move to the next one. That's hard to do in the city. County's a little easier to work with. I've heard that one. We're going to work. I know our team is doing a great job and trying to do everything they can to make it straightforward. So those are the things I'm hearing. One of the phrases you used earlier, Ms. Heisen, is we don't know what we don't know. And that's something I've used in some of these conversations. We'll approve countywide planning policy, we'll adopt it, 500 pages. But and we look at all these discount factors that I've spent a lot of time talking to Mr. Powers about. If someone has 2 lots in town, what are the odds that they'll ever split that in half and develop 2 houses? Because that's counted in the buildable lands analysis. The empirical data shows, I share office space in Remax Real Estate. The empirical data shows they're not doing that. In theory, this could happen, and I'm all for upzoning and more density going high. Trust me, I am, if we can make it make sense. But if you look, we all have it, if not, I'll forward it to you, the last 10 years worth of building permits that we've issued as a city, we've got a problem here. We talked about it in the previous administration. We sat here and talked about it. Mr. Almberg, you spoke strongly, I appreciate that. We talked about solving this housing thing 4 years ago. Well, here we are. And so in its infancy, I think this has, or I should say, I would at least want it to have the opportunity to go through that public process. Clear the regulatory barriers. That's where it starts, and the court of public opinion. But in that court of public opinion, that's why I appreciated your comments, make sure they're informed, right? A family has the right to sell its property. Is the aquifer going to be drained overnight? I heard that, and I've gotten emails on that. Let's make sure we understand what happens. How does this development get water? Does it even touch the aquifer? Does it pull out or does it put in? Who pays for all these studies coming up? I got an email today, the mayor got the same email. It was an email that the developer sent to the county talking about the traffic studies, the EIS, the SEPA, that they fully intend, if it goes forward to, they fully intend to pay for that stuff. So once again, that's why I say in its infancy, I support that. I hung around, I guess the last comment was kind of interesting when you tried to understand both sides of this thing at that informational meeting. I stayed afterwards pretty much until everyone was out of the room. And I watched and listened to some of the side conversations, and there were people that I assumed were there that were speaking in opposition. But one of the questions I heard is they were trying to figure out which way their utility routes would go. And they said, well, am I going to be able to connect? Can I get city water and sewer? I still want my county parcel, and that's fair, right? A couple acres or 5 acres, but can I get city water and sewer? So those are all the things that have to get sorted out. So I appreciate everyone that spoke, even those that didn't spoke but showed up tonight to learn more about this process. And I would just continue to encourage you to ask questions. Some people will have very strong opinions one way or the other, but at least try and understand the other side and understand the bigger impact and what it means, you know, for us as a city. That's where I look at it 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. Thank you.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would say that this is a very ambitious project. I would say ambitious project, but it's not impossible. I can see the many roadblocks to reach that destination. We all know about the roadblocks to make this a success. The Wright crossing requesting for expansion of the urban growth area. Now, let's go back some years ago. As I recall, there was an analysis made about the shortage of buildable lands within the city limits. And this was incorporated, I think, in the comprehensive plan, and the city requested the county for expansion of the urban growth area. Now, the county counteracted by making legal action against the city that there are available buildable lands within the city. and the city lost. Now, there was discussion, I think not formal discussion, that one of the solutions is to get the real estate business involved to have promotion of those buildable lands within the city. I don't think we didn't get any response on how did it go. I guess it didn't go very well. Now, if the city decided to request the county for expansion of the urban growth area, we might fall on the same fail that we did before. Are we going again through analysis of buildable land infill within the city for the request for expansion of urban growth area?
Mr. McGow, that's not our task by agreement through the countywide planning policies. If the city is initiating the request to expand the urban growth area, if I recall correctly, then it's our obligation to undertake the buildable lands analysis. If it's part of the periodic update, or if it's part of a privately initiated application, it's the county's obligation to conduct the analysis. We would then review their work, just like we did a year or so ago when we were working on it. But by our countywide planning policies, it's their job to undertake that reanalysis of the buildable lands.
I think I understand that.
Okay. There's a lot of
So
planner geek
it's
in
not,
there. We're not doing it right now. If the thresholds are met by this application, the county will have to do it. And then we'll review that work. But they will, I'm going to slide into geekdom here for a minute, I'm sorry. They will use the methodology that we have agreed upon. And so part of the conversation that I've been hearing in the community is that the methodology leaves something to be desired. That may be true, but you can't just ignore the methodology. We would go through a process collaboratively with the county to say, here are places that we think we should change how this calculation works. And then both bodies would have to agree to that, county commissioners and the city council. Then you'd have a new model that you can use. But we're prevented from ignoring the model that we already have. And I apologize for sliding off into plannerdom.
Okay. Now, another question. Throughout the agenda bill, I've seen many items referring to affordable housing. We know what affordable housings are, and could you give us definitions so others may know the definition for affordable housing?
So the hour is late, and I would like to say that it's in the eye of the beholder, but I won't do that. There is a formal definition, and the most typical one is 80% of the average median income. And that's how you're going to base your affordable housing. But there are other thresholds as well. And so we also talk about what percentage of your income is being used for your housing on a monthly basis. And if you're using 30% of your income, I think the term is distressed. If it's 50% or more of your income, it's severely distressed or severely something or another. And so there is sort of a standard definition, but it is, in all honesty, in some ways in the eye of the beholder. If we're talking about it from a housing program perspective or state funding or federal funding, it's going to use one of those definitions with percentages in them. If we're just talking about is it more affordable than someplace else, that's really more of a subjective thing.
Thank you. In addition, I have one more. I can really see opportunity in this urban growth expansion because we really need more housing, especially affordable housing. And there's a really shortage of affordable housing in the city. But there are many roadblocks to take and or remove those roadblocks. And it's up to the proponent to do these and with the help of the city staff, of course. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Anyone else? No additional comments at this point in time? Well, I thank you very much for a nice job. I wondered how this was going to go earlier today. and
So did I, Mayor.
You did a pretty nice job. So
Thank you.
I think with that, we've completed all of our items, and we'll stand adjourned. Thank you for your input tonight.